Chapter 24:20. The four of them were highly skilled in martial arts and had made a name for themselves very early on. 50 years ago, they became famous and had always been elusive. At that time, Ji Yunhao offered a large sum of money to hire the four of them as the imperial guards. He even personally visited them but was rejected by the four of them. The four of them were carefree and unfettered. Could be said that they did not obey anyone. Who would have thought that they would actually recognize Ji Yunhuang as their master? The martial arts of the four of them could easily throw Ji Huanyu's 8 bodyguards to the ground. Master, it's our fault for not protecting you properly and causing you to be injured. Please punish us. The four of them spoke at the same time and closed their mouths at the same time. Ji Yunhuang waved his hand. I didn't allow you to follow me. I don't blame you. Get up. The four of them stood up together. What was even rarer was that the four of them were of the same height. If not for the fact that there were men and women, everyone would have thought that they were the same person's clones. The four of them surrounded Ji Yunhuang in the middle and faintly separated everyone, not allowing anyone to come forward. One of them took out a token and flashed it. Imperial decree. Everyone who sees Imperial Uncle is the same as seeing Emperor himself. Who wouldn't kneel down when seeing the Emperor? The onlookers hurriedly kowtowed towards Ji Yunhuang, and the entire lakeside knelt down. Even Ji Huanyu, the young marquis, unwillingly kowtowed again. Tian Xueqing frowned slightly. According to the Medical Valley's rules, there was no distinction between nobility and lowly. Even the arrogant Ji Huanyu could only be obedient here and did not dare to cause trouble. If he did, he would be sent out by her. Just now, when she saw Ji Huanyu being aggressive towards Ji Yunhuang, she subconsciously felt disgusted. She was about to stop him when this series of events happened. She raised her head and looked at Ji Yunhuang, who was standing nearby. She faintly felt that he was a little far away from her. She pursed her lips and could not help but lean towards her master. She had always liked her master. Her master should be the person she relied on in this life. She did not like to be disturbed by others. She liked a peaceful life, but this imperial uncle was like the ocean. An unpredictable ocean that seemed to be able to swallow her whole, so she had to stay far away from him. Once she was done treating his injuries, she wanted him to quickly leave and stay away from her life. She wanted him to stop disturbing her peaceful life. The light in Ji Yunhuang's eyes dimmed slightly. The blood and qi in his chest were surging violently, and the ice soul poison in his arm was beginning to stir. Once it spread, even the gods would not be able to save him. He wanted to turn around and leave, but as soon as his foot moved, his vision turned black and his body swayed. Master! The two males of the quadruplets supported Ji Yunhuang from both sides. As soon as they helped Ji Yunhuang up, they realized that something was wrong. It was clearly the beginning of summer, but their master's body was as cold as ice. Master, you're poisoned. Who did it? The gazes of the quadruplets all shot towards Ji Huanyu. Ji Huanyu felt a chill in his heart and subconsciously took a step back. It wasn't me. He was poisoned long ago. It has nothing to do with them. Ji Yunhuang barely managed to spit out a few words. His entire body was ice cold, but the blood in his throat was surging. The poison is about to act up. Tian Xueqing had already rushed over and reached out her hand to check his pulse. Unexpectedly, Ji Yunhuang took a step back and ignored her. He only instructed the four subordinates. Send me back to my room. I can suppress it myself. Tian Xueqing's fingers touched nothing but air. She then watched as the four men quickly supported Ji Yunhuang into his room. Chapter 24:21. She pursed her lips tightly. Her heart felt like it was wrapped in ice, but it also felt like it was burning. She couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was. She stood there for a moment and suddenly took a deep breath. She said in a low voice, Master, I'm going to see him. Then she ran towards Ji Yunhuang's room. GMO stood there and his eyes flashed with a trace of deep thought. Ji Huanyu was still on his little uncle's side. He hurriedly pushed him. Little uncle, you should also go take a look. Don't let your wife run away. GMO frowned. What nonsense are you talking about? She is my disciple. I'm older than her by a whole generation. Imperial granduncle is older than her by 100 years. Didn't he still chase after her? Little uncle, if you don't hurry up, I'm afraid it will really be too late. Jimo's heart was in a mess. But she is still young. Ji Huanyu immediately said, she's not young anymore. She's almost 15. In another half a month, it will be her coming-of-age ceremony, right? After that, she will be able to marry. Little uncle, she and you are a match made in heaven. You can't miss this opportunity. Someone else has taken the initiative. Imperial granduncle took a fancy to her, perhaps because her name is the same as Imperial granduncle's wife, or perhaps because her appearance is similar. Imperial granduncle took her as a substitute. Can you bear to see her being taken as a substitute? GMO took a step back and narrowed his eyes. Qing was a treasure that he had personally raised. He naturally didn't want her to suffer any grievances. Imperial Uncle Ji had suffered from the ice soul poison because of him. If he couldn't cure him in time, he was afraid that his little disciple's heart would never be able to let go. Let me in. I'm a doctor here. I can treat him. Otherwise, he will be poisoned very quickly. Tian Xueqing was blocked by the quadruplets at the door, because Ji Yunhuang had ordered that no one was allowed to disturb him. Tian Xueqing was anxious to know the extent of Ji Yunhuang's injuries, but these two women were like door gods, not letting her in. She could only argue with them. Piggy Wang Kai was also indignant at the side. Hey, this is our master's territory. My master can go wherever he wants. What qualifications do you have to stop him? Don't you know that non-patients are not allowed to enter this valley? Even young Marquis Ji was no exception. Every time he came, his subordinates would obediently wait outside the valley. So what if your master is the imperial uncle? So what if he doesn't abide by the rules of the medical valley? Let her in. The four of you can leave the valley. Ji Yunhuang's voice suddenly came from inside the house. Although his voice was weak and hoarse, his tone was firm. The four of them hesitated for a moment. Master, your injuries are so serious. You need someone to serve you. No need. I just need to control the poison. You can leave now. Don't make me say it again. Since he had said so, the four of them could not disobey. They could only bow and leave the valley. Piggy Wang Kai was worried and followed behind them to supervise them. Wang Kai looked cute and all girls liked cute things. The two girls among the quadruplets couldn't help but tease it. Your name is Wang Kai. So what? Wang Kai raised its nose. Your master gave you a good name. It's rare to see a little pig that is so smart and can even speak human language. Another woman sighed. What piggy? I am Wentian. Divine Beast Wentian. Wang Kai was angry. The four of them naturally did not care about the anger of a little pig. Chapter 24-22. Wang Kai. Do you know how my master was poisoned by the ice soul poison? Wang Kai snorted. My master was poisoned by the ice soul poison. In order to repay the debt, your master helped to cure my master. But in the end, your master was poisoned. Wang Kai's words about your master and my master did not confuse anyone. But the quadruplets were somewhat surprised. Repay the debt? Repay what debt? At that time, your master was injured by the cloud-swallowing beast and was on the verge of death. My master saved him and gave him a lot of expensive medicine, which amounted to a total of 1,000 taels of silver. Your master was extremely poor and could not afford to repay the debt. So he expressed his willingness to sell himself as a servant to repay the debt. He only worked as a servant for a few days and did not make him do any physical work. Later, when my master was poisoned and came back, your master. He cured my master of the poison, so my master magnanimously repaid him 1,000 taels of silver. The debt between the two of them was written off. Although Wang Kai's words were incoherent, the quadruplets still understood, and their faces were filled with disbelief. Selling himself for a mere 1,000 taels of silver. Was this something that the second master of Buddha Lotus Mountain would do? The quadruplets often followed Ji Yunhuang around, so they knew that he was never short of money. He could casually spend thousands of taels of silver, and even tens of thousands of taels of silver was a common occurrence. Wang Kai and Little Pig had an expression that said, "Your master got a great bargain," which made the quadruplets very unhappy. One of them smiled and casually took out a banknote from his bosom and handed it to Wang Kai's hoof. He smiled and patted Wang Kai's head. "This is 10,000 taels of silver. Use it to buy some snacks. Remember to treat my master well. Also, tell your master to give my master the best medicine. Just tell us how much money you need, and we will not hesitate, as long as you don't let my master suffer any grievances. Also, if you implicate my master in any matters in the future, just tell us if you have any difficulties." Wang Kai was speechless. It looked at the banknote beside its hoof. It was indeed 10,000 taels of silver, and it could be exchanged throughout the country. While it was in a daze, the quadruplets had already disappeared. Ji Yunhuang sat there, his handsome face alternating between green, white, and red. The light around his body flickered and his forehead was drenched in cold sweat. Because he had been poisoned by the ice soul poison, the cold sweat had turned into ice the moment it came out. It was as if his forehead was covered with a layer of ice armor. Even his hair and eyebrows were covered with a layer of white frost. He was originally dressed in white, but at this moment, he looked like a lifeless snow sculpture. Tian Xueqing's fingers trembled slightly. She never thought that the cold poison in Ji Yunhuang's body would be so strong. Wang Kai clearly told her that he was fine, that he was getting better and better. She wanted to perform acupuncture on him and expel the poison from his body, just like how she treated her master, however. Ji Yunhuang only shook his head and said, "Protect me." In other words, he would be able to expel the poison himself, and Tian Xueqing would only need to protect him. The way he meditated was something Tian Xueqing had never seen before. Strands of cold air swirled around his body, seemingly condensed yet not condensed. Tian Xueqing did not dare to blindly interrupt him, so she could only stand at the door and guard him. She watched his every move and tightly held a silver needle in her hand. She was prepared to rush forward to save him if he made a single mistake. At this moment, her mind was completely blank, and she could not think of anything. Occasionally, she would raise her head and see GMO standing not far away. He was wearing a light green robe, and he looked like a big tree that she could lean on and rest. Chapter 24-23. Occasionally, she would raise her head and see GMO standing not far away. He was wearing a light green robe and looked like a big tree that she could lean on to rest. He just stood there quietly looking at her and did not disturb her. The master and disciple looked at each other. GMO smiled at her. His smile was as warm as usual, but her heart clenched for no reason. She was no longer as calm as before. Instead, she was a little confused, however. She still smiled back at her master. The master and disciple seemed to have a tacit understanding. "Master!" Little Pig Wang Kai jumped back. Tian Xueqing shushed it, telling it not to make any noise, so that it would not disturb Ji Yunhuang, who was meditating inside. Wang Kai pulled out a banknote from its chest pocket and whispered, "Master, look, a banknote worth 10,000 taels." Tian Xueqing was surprised. "Where did you get this?" Wang Kai then repeated what it had said to the quadruplets. Tian Xueqing was silent. It seemed that the Honorable Imperial Uncle Ji was willing to stay here as a servant because of her. No, it was not for her. It was for the crown princess who had the same name as her. He treated her as a substitute for the crown princess who had died young, so he treated her like a pearl and listened to her every word. He did not hesitate to lower himself and become a servant. She closed her eyes. Her heart was in a mess. She felt sour and bitter at the same time. She did not know what she was feeling. After all, she was not even 15 years old. When faced with this kind of messy relationship, she did not know what to do. GMO waved at her from afar. Tian Xueqing let Little Pig Wang Kai watch over her while she ran towards her master. The master and disciple were talking under a big tree. They could see Wang Kai and Ji Yunhuang's room when they raised their heads. "Xueqing, how is he?" "He is healing himself. Now he is a little more stable." GMO sighed. "It's all because of me." Tian Xueqing did not want her master to feel burdened. "Master, you don't have to feel sorry. He did it for to repay his debt. She was a little lacking in confidence as she spoke. GMO looked at her and saw her looking at Ji Yunhuang's room every few sentences. He sighed in his heart. Xueqing, you... Master, there is nothing between us. He's just a patient of mine. He'll leave once he recovers. Tian Xueqing sounded anxious, as if she wanted to distance herself from something. GMO raised his hand and stroked her hair. Don't worry. I know that you don't have any feelings for him, but Master, he's probably treating me like this because of my name, or maybe because I look like the late crown princess. He actually doesn't like me. He'll understand soon enough. Although she was still young, she didn't want to be anyone's substitute. In order to prove something, Tian Xueqing tugged on Jimo's sleeve and shook it coquettishly. Master, Xueqing said that I want to stay by your side forever and be your right-hand woman. GMO lowered his eyes to look at her. His gaze was slightly complicated. He sighed softly. You were still young at that time. What you said was childish. Xueqing, you will marry sooner or later. How can you stay by Master's side forever? Then I'll never get married. Tian Xueqing was naturally sensitive and afraid of marriage. It was as if once she got married, she would fall into hell. GMO pressed his palm on Tian Xueqing's shoulder and muttered to himself. His gaze fell on her face again. Xueqing, are you really willing to stay by Master's side forever? I'm willing. Tian Xueqing answered without hesitation. Chapter 24:24. Then I have a way to fulfill your wish. What way? GMO paused for a moment, as if he found it hard to say. In the end, he made up his mind and said, You can marry me. That way, you and I will be master and disciple, as well as husband and wife. Naturally, we can stay together for the rest of our lives. Tian Xueqing felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She opened her mouth slightly and was stunned. She was very peaceful and comfortable beside her master, so she was willing to stay by his side for the rest of her life. But to marry him, she had never thought of this before. This proposal came too suddenly, and Tian Xueqing did not know how to react. Since he had already said this, GMO decided to strike while the iron was hot. Xueqing, don't worry. Even after we get married, we will still get along with each other. I will only treat you better, and our lives will not change too much. The life that she liked would not change. Nothing would change. This should be acceptable, right? Wasn't this what she had always hoped for? Tian Xueqing felt that she should agree, but she could not open her mouth. Her pretty face flushed red. GMO patted her shoulder. Xueqing, I know this is too sudden for you. You can think about it before giving me an answer. There is no need to rush. GMO turned around and left. Tian Xueqing stood there in a daze for a moment before slowly walking back to Ji Yunhuang's room. Fortunately, Ji Yunhuang's poison was controlled in time and did not worsen. Tian Xueqing waited at his door for 4 hours before she finally saw that he had recovered. She heaved a sigh of relief and silently used her sleeves to wipe the cold sweat from her palms. The ice on his body had already disappeared. Although his face was still pale, it was no longer blue. There was also a faint red color on his lips. He had probably suffered too much just now. His body was covered in cold sweat, which had formed a frost armor. When he controlled the poison, the frost armor melted, making him look like he had just been fished out of the water. His white robes were also drenched. He stretched his limbs and then looked at her. His gaze was too complicated, causing Tian Xueqing's words to be stuck in her throat. She held back for a moment and finally squeezed out a sentence. How are you? Not bad. I finally got it under control. Ji Yunhuang replied. His voice was extremely hoarse, and he looked exhausted. Oh, that's good. That's good. Tian Xueqing unconsciously replied. Ji Yunhuang looked at her without saying a word. After all, the little girl was still young. Although she tried her best to remain calm, her nervousness and helplessness were practically written all over her face. Tian Xueqing felt her hair stand on end from being stared at by him. She had never been afraid of meeting anyone's gaze before, but now, she was afraid of Ji Yunhuang. She stood up and said, Since you're fine, I'll go back first. Your clothes are wet. Go back and change them. I'll get someone to wash them for you. She turned to leave. Do you like your master? Ji Yun Huang suddenly asked. This question was too straightforward. Tian Xueqing paused for a moment before replying. Of course. The like I'm talking about is the like that I want to marry him. Ji Yun Huang said word by word. Is that what you like about him? His questions were getting sharper and sharper, as if he was forcing her to face them. Tian Xueqing. She suddenly became angry and blurted out. What does it have to do with you whether I like him or not? Your Excellency is worrying too much. She turned around and left. Ji Yun Huang grabbed her hand and pulled her back. Chapter 24-25. Ji Yun Huang grabbed her hand and pulled her back. Tian Xueqing almost fell into his embrace. She hurriedly placed her hand on his shoulder and distanced herself from him by an arm's length. Her face turned red again. Hey, what are you doing? She struggled to get up. However, Ji Yun Huang held her wrist tightly and refused to let go. His palm was burning hot, as if it wanted to burn into her heart. Xueqing, you should know how I feel about you, so this has to do with me. I like you, the kind of like that I want to marry you. Tian Xueqing froze again. In just a short while, two men had already confessed to her. But she did not feel happy at all. Instead, she was extremely flustered. She did not like marrying or marrying. She did not like it at all. She did not want anyone to disturb her peaceful life again. After all, he had not fully recovered yet. So Tian Xueqing easily broke free from his hand. She took a few steps back and took a deep breath. She said word by word, I'm sorry, but I don't like you. I only like my master. If I want to marry, I want to marry him. You should give up on this idea as soon as possible. After she finished speaking, she did not dare to stay any longer and ran out as if she was escaping. Xueqing! Ji Yun Huang called out to her and jumped down from the bed. He wanted to catch her, but she ran away so fast that he didn't even manage to catch a glimpse of her clothes. He could only watch as she left without even turning his head back. I only like my master. If I want to marry someone, I want to marry him. Ji Yun Huang's vision turned black. He staggered and fell to the ground. Her last sentence was like a demon's voice that kept ringing in his head. His blood surged and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The moon was like a hook. Tian Xueqing sat on a hillside and looked at the moon in a daze. Her head was still buzzing, as if there were 1,000 bees buzzing in her head. Master! Wang Kai ran over and stopped in front of her while panting. How is he? Tian Xueqing asked. He did not touch the food that was sent to him. He has been cultivating. Other than his pale face, there is nothing wrong with him. Wang Kai reported. Tian Xueqing was stunned. It had already been a day and Ji Yun Huang had not eaten a single grain of rice. The food that was sent to him was not touched at all. Was he ruining his body to make her feel guilty? Her heart was suddenly filled with anger. Why should she feel guilty? She had saved his life and he owed her money. Then, he had saved her master and repaid her debt. He and she clearly did not owe each other anything. Why did she have to agree just because he wanted to treat her as someone else's substitute? They were strangers to begin with, all right? Tian Xueqing was furious as she paced back and forth on the spot. Wang Sai's eyes followed her, and it was almost dizzy. It didn't understand what its master was angry about. Master, it's just that he hasn't eaten for a day. It won't be a problem, right? Moreover, he has cultivated an immortal body, so he should have already abstained from eating. It doesn't matter if he doesn't eat for a few days. What do you know? This kind of poison consumes a lot of his energy, and if he doesn't eat it, it will be even harder for him to get rid of it. Tian Xueqing said angrily. Wang Kai rolled its eyes and gave her an idea. Why don't you feed him? If you feed him, maybe he'll eat it. Tian Xueqing. Xueqing. GMO walked over from a small path and sized her up. What's wrong? Who provoked you? It's that imperial Uncle G who doesn't eat. Master is angry because of this. That person doesn't know how to cherish himself. Master has been researching various ways to treat him, but he is angry because of this. Chapter 24-26. At the side, Wang Kai quickly spoke. Jimo's gaze fell on Tian Xueqing's face, and after a moment of silence, he said, Xueqing, young Master Ji was poisoned because he tried to save me. Since the Netherworld flower can cure this poison, I will go and pick the herbs tomorrow? Tian Xueqing was shocked. That won't do. The place where the Netherworld flower grows is very dangerous, and there are Netherworld snakes guarding it. Master, the poison in your body has not been cured yet, so you can't take the risk. Moreover, the poison in young Master Ji's body is different from the previous poison. I'm afraid that the Netherworld flower alone won't be enough. It needs to be combined with other herbs and techniques. I'm almost healed. What other herbs do I need? Tell me. GMO refused to give up. Tian Xueqing had no choice but to tell him the other herbs and added, I've already asked Huanyu to send people to look for them. They should be back soon. It turned out that this girl had been preparing for a long time. GMO raised his hand and knocked on her head. I have these herbs with me. Why didn't you ask me for them? Instead, you went to a faraway place? Tian Xueqing's eyes lit up. She remembered that her master didn't have these herbs. She didn't expect that he would have them now. As if he had guessed Tian Xueqing's doubts, GMO sighed and said, After I was poisoned, I've been looking for a way to cure the poison. These herbs were prepared at that time. All right, since I have the other herbs, I'll go and pick the Netherworld flower tomorrow morning. Tian Xueqing was still worried and immediately said, I'll go with you. After all, I've picked the Netherworld flower once and know where it grows. Wang Kai also volunteered, I'll go too. I'll go too. It'll be faster for me to find the flower. GMO knew that his little disciple wouldn't feel at ease letting him go alone. So he agreed. As long as she could pick the Netherworld flower, she would be able to cure Ji Yunhuang completely. At that time, she wouldn't owe him anything. At that time, he would leave completely, and she wouldn't have anything to do with him anymore. Thinking of this, Tian Xueqing heaved a sigh of relief, but she also felt an inexplicable sense of melancholy. Xueqing, I won't let you owe anyone a favor. GMO held her hand. I'll let you live a stable and happy life. Tian Xueqing didn't know why, but she didn't. She opened her mouth. Master. Xueqing, you don't have to be in a hurry to give me an answer. You're still young and we have plenty of time ahead of us. GMO patted her little hand. All right, we'll set off early tomorrow morning. Rest early tonight. Before Tian Xueqing went to bed, she was still worried and went to Ji Yunhuang's place to take a look. He was still meditating, sitting there with his eyes lowered like a Buddha. His handsome face was still extremely pale, but his complexion was not as frightening as before. It seemed that even though he didn't eat, it didn't affect his body that much. Tian Xueqing didn't want to go in again, so she didn't want to be entangled with him again. She hid in the shadows at the door and looked at him, then turned around and left. Ji Yunhuang meditated for an entire day and night before he managed to suppress the poison. At dusk the next day, he came out of the house. He wanted to have a good talk with Tian Xueqing. He had been searching for her for 100 years, and he did not want to let her go so easily. Tian Xueqing seemed to have misunderstood him. Perhaps she thought that he only treated her as a substitute, but in fact, she wasn't. She had always been Tian Xueqing, just that she had been reborn, of course. If Tian Xueqing truly loved her master and was already in love with him, then he would let go and not break up the two of them. He would rather be alone for the rest of his life than break her up. He would help her achieve her goal. Chapter 24-27. With this goal in mind, he went to Tian Xueqing's courtyard and met Fen Shui. Then he received a piece of shocking news. Tian Xueqing and her master, GMO, had gone to the mountain to pick the Netherworld flower. They had left early in the morning and had not returned. Ji Yunhuang's mind buzzed. He knew better than anyone how difficult it was to pick the Netherworld flower. He also knew how difficult it was to deal with the Netherworld snake. With his martial arts, he still had to be cautious. Not to mention this pair of master and disciple whose martial arts were mediocre. Although GMO's martial arts were slightly higher, it was still limited. Moreover, he still had poison in his system, so he could only use 70% of his martial arts. If they encountered several netherworld snakes, the master and disciples' lives would be in danger. He suddenly clenched his fists. Was she in such a hurry to chase him away? She was willing to pay any price for this. He had said that he would find a way to detoxify the poison once he controlled it. No matter how angry he was, he could not ignore her. Without saying anything, he turned around and ran. The wind whistled past. Tian Xueqing carefully walked on the narrow path beside the cliff. Behind her was Wang Kai, who was also cautious. GMO walked in front, his sleeves fluttering. Last time, falling off the cliff had left a deep psychological shadow on her. Now that she was walking here, her heart could not help but pound. Wang Kai looked at Tian Xueqing nervously. It was ready to jump off the cliff to save her at any time. Don't be afraid. Master is here. Ji Mo's gentle voice came from the front. He did not turn around to know that Tian Xueqing was very nervous. Master's voice clearly had a soothing effect. Tian Xueqing raised her head and looked at his back. She took a deep breath and calmed down a lot. Suddenly, Ji Mo's body staggered and swayed. Tian Xueqing was shocked. Just as she was about to support him, GMO had already stabilized himself. Master, what happened? Her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Her voice could not help but tremble a little. GMO shook his head with his back facing her. I accidentally tripped. Xueqing, don't worry. Watch your step. Tian Xueqing wanted to run over and look at GMO's face, but the path was too narrow. Could barely fit one person, so she could only give up. After walking for a while, Wang Sai's eyes lit up. It excitedly said, Master, Master, the netherworld flower is in front of us. Their eyes lit up, and they quickened their pace as they walked forward. At the top of the mountain, at the edge of the cliff, a faint blue flower was fluttering in the wind. The place where the flower grew was extremely steep. It was at the edge of the cliff, and the wind on the cliff was very strong. It was so strong that it was almost impossible to stand. Tian Xueqing pursed her lips and was about to walk forward. GMO stopped her. You stay here. Master will go and pick them. Tian Xueqing grabbed GMO's sleeve and carefully looked at his face. A trace of uneasiness flashed through her eyes. Master, is the poison in your body really gone? I see that your face is still a little pale. GMO patted her head and smiled. Xueqing, have more confidence in your master. Tian Xueqing still wanted to say something, but GMO stroked her head and said, Master has been wandering the world for many years and has collected countless rare medicinal herbs. He has never failed before. Don't worry. That was true. Even though Master's martial arts were not as good as Ji Yunhuang's, he was still one of the world's top experts, and moreover, Ji Yunhuang's poison could not be delayed any longer. Thus, picking the netherworld flower became an urgent matter. Chapter 24-28. Tian Xueqing let go of Ji Mo's sleeve and took a deep breath. Master, you must be careful. This flower has the protection of the hell snake and is very powerful. It is poisonous all over and can even spit out poisonous liquid and fog. She explained the characteristics of the hell snake in detail. GMO looked at her gently and knew that she was worried about him. His heart warmed as he smiled faintly. Okay, I will be careful. Although his face was pale, his movements were very nimble. His sleeves fluttered as he walked to the edge of the cliff. When he was a few feet away from the flower, he flicked his finger and a silver needle flew towards the flower. A small blue snake pounced at him at lightning speed. Tian Xueqing's heart was in her throat as she unconsciously clenched her sleeves. Looking at the menacing hell snake, she wanted to go up and help, but the terrain was too narrow. It would be too cramped for the two of them, so she could only watch from the side. Her fingers gripped the hilt of her sword, ready to help if anything went wrong. GMO pulled out his long sword, and a sparkling green light flew towards the snake. The man and the snake fought at the edge of the cliff. The green light was like autumn waves while the blue light was like clear water. They were fiercely clashing. The mountain wind was biting cold, causing GMO's green robe to flutter. He stood at the edge of the cliff as if he would ride the wind at any moment. There were a few times when his feet were in the air, but he landed steadily every time. Tian Xueqing's heart was like a roller coaster. She was extremely nervous. She pursed her lips tightly and her face was pale. Even from this distance, Tian Xueqing could see her master's pale face and the cold sweat on his forehead. Her master had just recovered from a serious illness and should be recuperating. Now that he had come out to pick herbs, it must be very taxing on his vitality. He was probably just holding on and not collapsing. Tian Xueqing's heart was burning with anxiety. She held her sword tightly and pursed her lips tightly. She slowly inched forward. If her master was in danger, she would take the hell snake down with her even if she had to risk her life. GMO was not only good with swords, but also with poisons. He occasionally flicked poisonous smoke and powder at the snake, all of which were targeted at poisonous snakes. After a while, the hell snake's movements became slower and slower. It was obvious that it was at a disadvantage. By the time the man and the snake had exchanged 70 to 80 blows, the hell snake was probably too tired and made a mistake. Crashed into a rock and almost fainted. GMO immediately rushed forward and swung his sword, preparing to cut off its head. Seeing that the dust had settled, Tian Xueqing felt as though a huge rock had been lifted from her heart. The unforeseen event happened in that instant. The hell snake, which had appeared to be dazed from the impact, suddenly leapt up like a bolt of blue lightning towards GMO's face. It was already too late for GMO to dodge. He steeled his heart and no longer dodged. Instead, he slashed out with his sword. In the end, GMO was faster. By the time the hell snake reached him, his sword had already cut it in two. Unexpectedly, half of the hell snake's body was still alive. It opened its mouth and spat out a large mouthful of poisonous fog before falling to the ground. GMO had been sprayed by the poisonous fog, and before the remaining poison had been cleared, a new poison had arrived. The two poisons instantly merged in his body and rampaged through his meridians. GMO did not have time to detoxify himself before his vision turned black. He staggered a few steps and suddenly lost his footing. In the next moment, his entire body fell to the ground. Master! Tian Xueqing was scared out of her wits. She immediately rushed over and grabbed GMO's hand. Chapter 24-29. However, GMO was still a man and he was still unconscious. Although she grabbed his hand, she was still pulled down by him. It was already difficult for her to stabilize herself and prevent herself from falling, let alone lift him up. Seeing that Tian Xueqing was about to be pulled down, Wangkai Piglet became anxious. Master! It pounced over and bit Tian Xueqing's trousers, trying to hold her down. Fortunately, Tian Xueqing's trousers were made of a special material, so they could not be easily torn or pulled down. Otherwise, she would be exposed. Even so, the situation was still critical. Half of Tian Xueqing's body was hanging in the air. Her hand was tightly grabbing GMO's wrist, and her face was red. GMO was hanging on the cliff with his eyes closed. He was already unconscious. Wangkai Piglet used all its strength to pull Tian Xueqing, but its strength was still not enough to move two people. Tian Xueqing's body slid down bit by bit. Wangkai's hooves left two deep marks on the ground, but it still could not stop her from sliding down. What to do? What to do? If this went on, they would all die. Master was unconscious, and Ji Yunhuang was still cultivating in the small courtyard in the valley. Wangkai could not rely on it. The only one who could save everyone was herself. Tian Xueqing was hanging upside down on the cliff, and her head was a little red. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. Wangkai, can you fly now? As long as Wangkai could fly, it would be able to fly with them if they fell down. Wangkai was about to cry. It was biting her trousers and could only speak with its nose. Wangkai was seriously injured last time. Although Master healed me, I can't fly in a short period of time. This was the second time it felt so useless. The first time was when Tian Xueqing was in danger and it was unable to protect its master. Ji Yunhuang came to save her. The second time was now. At such a critical moment, it actually dropped the ball. If its master died, it would not live anymore. It wanted to accompany its master. Master, I'm sorry. Tian Xueqing's last hope was destroyed, and her heart was filled with despair. However, it was impossible for her to give up on her master at this time. 2 people and 1 pet slid down uncontrollably. Tian Xueqing had already slid down the cliff, and only Wang Kai Piglet was still hanging on. With its last bit of strength exhausted, Wang Kai could not hold on any longer. Its legs went soft and its whole body slid out of the cliff, hanging in the air. Tian Xueqing felt like she was falling straight down like a cannonball. The wind was howling, and she could barely hear anything else. She quickly passed through the clouds and fell into the abyss. The rapid fall made her heart almost jump out of her chest, and her head felt dizzy. He was falling so fast that Tian Xueqing couldn't catch him at all. She watched as his hand slipped from her palm. Master! Tian Xueqing desperately tried to touch his hand, but she was always a little short. Ji Mo's eyes were still closed as he silently fell down. Tian Xueqing's heart was filled with grief. Her master had come here to pick herbs to make her feel at ease. Since everyone was going to die, then let's die together. Only then would she be able to live up to her master's kindness in raising her. Only then would she be able to live up to her master's kindness. Ji Yunhuang's figure seemed to flash in front of her eyes, and her heart felt like it was being pierced by needles. She never thought that last night would be a farewell. Chapter 24:30. She struggled with all her might, trying to grab the corner of her master's clothes. Clothes, even closer. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. At this critical juncture, Tian Xueqing suddenly felt her waist tighten. A white light descended from the sky and wrapped around her waist. That white light first sank down, reducing the force of her fall. Following that, it suddenly pulled her upwards. Before she could react, her entire body flew upwards. All of this happened in a flash. When she finally reacted, she had already landed on the cliff. Her legs were numb from the impact and her vision was a little blurry. Her head was still throbbing with pain. Her legs went soft and she fell towards a rock. The expected pain did not come. She was caught off guard and fell into a cold embrace with a faint medicinal fragrance. Her eyes suddenly widened. It's him, Ji Yunhuang. He actually rushed over at this time. This person always appeared from the sky at the most crucial time. Tian Xueqing did not need to raise her head to know who this embrace belonged to. Her nose turned sour and she almost wanted to cry. She was still in a state of shock and even her body was trembling. Ji Yunhuang originally had a stomach full of anger, but when he saw her pale face, that anger could not be vented. His heart softened and the arm that was hugging her waist tightened. He gently comforted her. Don't be afraid. Everything is fine now. Tian Xueqing's body was still trembling uncontrollably. She suddenly thought of something and broke free from Ji Yunhuang's embrace. She suddenly turned her head. Master. There was no one behind her. Only Wang Kai Piglet was still lying there with a confused face. She looked around in panic but did not see a single trace of her master's clothes. Master. Her voice trembled and changed pitch. Where's my master? My master didn't he save me? Ji Yunhuang's fingers tightened. He pursed his lips and said in a hoarse voice, I only saw you. He only had time to save her. I fell down with my master. You should have seen him. I almost caught him. Tian Xueqing's heart trembled in panic. Her voice was filled with disbelief. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Ji Yunhuang. You really didn't see him? Ji Yunhuang's face was extremely pale. His clothes were almost drenched in cold sweat. He forcefully held his breath and shook his head. When he rushed over, they had just slid down. When he rushed to the edge of the cliff, he could only see Tian Xueqing's skirt. GMO was below Tian Xueqing, so he did not see him. Furthermore, the ice soul poison in Ji Yunhuang's body was still wreaking havoc. When he pulled Tian Xueqing up, he had used up almost all of his strength. Right now, he could barely stand. Tian Xueqing's heart turned cold. Although she had come up, her heart seemed to have fallen into an endless abyss. She stood there in a daze, her expression absent-minded. Master didn't save me. Ji Yunhuang said Tian Xueqing. I am sorry. Tian Xueqing acted as if she did not hear him. She turned around and wanted to rush towards the cliff. Master, Ji Yunhuang his heart to Xueqing. Xueqing Xueqing's? Xueqing. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing flung his hand away and took a step back. Tears were streaming down her face, and her voice was sharp. I don't need you to care about me. I want to save my master. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists and said in a low voice, He has already fallen down. You can't save him. Calm down. Let's think about it. Chapter 24:31. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists and said in a low voice, He has already fallen down. You can't save him. Calm down, let's discuss this. He knew that his words were too cruel, but at this time, he had to let her see the truth. He was afraid that she would do something stupid, so he held her arm tightly. Tian Xueqing pushed him away. Her actions were too violent, and Ji Yunhuang staggered from her push. He barely managed to stand up straight. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing was flustered and lost her usual calmness. She spoke without thinking. You want me to give up on my master? How can you be so ungrateful? My master fell down because he wanted to pick herbs for you. You don't want to save him, and you want to stop me from saving him. It's all your fault. If you didn't cause so much trouble, how could my master fall down the cliff? If my master dies, will you be happy? Let me tell you, you're dreaming. Even if my master dies, I will not marry you. I hate you the most. She couldn't continue speaking. She suddenly turned around and ran towards the cliff. She wanted to see if there was a way to go down. Before Tian Xueqing reached the edge of the cliff, her vision blurred and she bumped into someone's embrace. That person staggered from the impact, but he still firmly held on to her. She suddenly raised her head. You! She choked on the word. Ji Yunhuang's eyes were pitch black, without any light. They were as dark and cold as a bottomless abyss. He looked at her condescendingly, his expression dark and gloomy. The shadow cast by him enveloped her whole body. This was the first time Tian Xueqing felt such a strong aura from Ji Yunhuang. It was cold and unfeeling. I have never wished for your master to die. Never. You wait here, I will go and save him. He had put in so much effort, but all he got in return was an ungrateful word. He had never walked into her heart. Ji Yunhuang was simply a joke. Their relationship in this lifetime was simply a joke. She only had her master in her heart. Then he would fulfill their wish. After he finished speaking, he flew down. Tian Xueqing only saw a white figure floating down. She hurriedly ran to the edge of the cliff, but she only had time to see his fluttering clothes that almost merged with the white clouds. He didn't look like he was flying down, but more like he was falling. Tian Xueqing's heart almost sank. She clenched her fists, her fingertips digging into her flesh. She suddenly remembered that Ji Yunhuang still had the ice soul poison wreaking havoc in his body. He basically couldn't use his psychokinesis. Then he rushed over in a hurry and saved her. She was afraid that he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Now he was forced to jump off the cliff. Just now, his face was actually very frighteningly pale. Would anything happen to him if he jumped down like this? Her heart felt like it was being gripped by something, and her body began to tremble slightly. She tilted her head to listen to the sounds below, and her heart hung in the air. After a while, Ji Yunhuang's voice resounded from below, carrying a distant echo. Although his voice wasn't loud, it was clearly transmitted into Tian Xueqing's ears. Throw down a rope that is long enough. About 200 feet. He was still alive. He spoke. She knew that he had an immortal body. He was someone who could fly, so a small cliff would not be a problem for him. Tian Xueqing's heart finally relaxed a little. My master, how is he? She couldn't help but ask as she searched for a rope in her backpack. Chapter 24:32. There was a long silence below. The silence made Tian Xueqing's heart jump. What? My master, is he? Is he? She did not dare to ask the rest of her question. He's still alive. Ji Yunhuang's reply finally came from below. Thank the heavens. Master is still alive. Tian Xueqing heaved a sigh of relief. She finally found a long rope, but it was obviously not long enough. She looked around and found a few sturdy vines, which she tied tightly to the rope. Then she threw the rope down. Is this okay? She asked the people below her. She did not know why, but she always wanted to talk to him, wanted to hear him speak. Tian Xueqing felt the rope in her hand sink slightly. Ji Yunhuang's voice came again. It's okay. Tie the rope to the thick tree. This time, his voice was much softer, even a little hoarse, as if he was forcing himself to speak. Tian Xueqing's heart suddenly twisted, as if someone was tightly gripping her heart. She felt unspeakable guilt and sadness. She felt that the words she said when she lost control of her emotions were extremely hurtful. Now that she thought about it, she wanted to slap herself. When he comes up later, she must apologize to him properly. She must expel the poison and treat his injuries, and see if he has any external injuries. Tian Xueqing anxiously looked at the edge of the cliff, then nervously looked at the rope. It was obvious that someone was pulling the rope up. The rope was constantly tightening, and the huge tree creaked from the rope. Tian Xueqing looked at the rope that was as taut as a stick, afraid that it would not be strong enough and snap. Her heart tightened again and again. She could not help but reach out and grab the rope, using all her strength to pull it back. The rope tightened, and Tian Xueqing's nerves were like the rope, tensed up into a straight line. Ji Yunhuang held the rope with one hand and carried GMO with the other, half supporting him as he moved up. The rope was wrapped around GMO's body. His head was full of cold sweat, and his vision was blurry. His vision was turning black, and his body was getting colder and colder. It was as if countless ice needles were rampaging through his body, causing him unbearable pain. Not only was the pain painful, but the most terrible thing was that his hands and feet were weak. Originally, he carried a person up the cliff as if he was walking on flat ground, but now, he felt as if he was carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. He knew that he was nearing his limit. Probably because the rope and the edge of the cliff were worn out too much. A strand of the thick rope could no longer bear the burden and suddenly broke. The rope trembled. His and Ji-Mo's bodies also sank down slightly. Tian Xueqing's heart almost jumped out of her chest. The broken rope was on the edge of the cliff, so she couldn't reinforce it or connect it. She took a deep breath. Are you guys all right? Ji Yunhuang raised his head and looked at the top of the cliff. His heart almost sank to the bottom of the lake. There was still a distance of several hundred feet between them. However, the rope could no longer support the weight of two people. Thinking of Tian Xueqing's frantic look, his heart twitched. He smiled bitterly. She treasured GMO so much. If GMO died, she would be very sad, right? He had never wanted to upset her. Can the two of you say something? Tian Xueqing's voice sounded again, and it sounded like she was about to cry. Ji Yunhuang lowered his eyes and indifferently replied, Don't worry, your master is very good. Then, without saying anything else, he carried GMO and climbed up. Chapter 24:33. Tian Xueqing was so nervous that she almost couldn't breathe. When she heard Ji Yunhuang's voice, she felt slightly relieved but also distressed. He only said that master was very good. What about him? How was he? Tian Xueqing wanted to ask, but she was afraid that she would distract him. She could only swallow the words that were about to come out. She was so nervous that her hands and feet were cold, and her face was pale. Snap! Another strand of the rope broke, but Ji Yunhuang didn't even look at it. He mobilized all of the remaining psychokinesis in his body, took a deep breath, and flew upwards with GMO in tow. He would risk his life to protect the safety of his beloved. There were only 2 strands left of the 4 strands of rope. These 2 strands were constantly being pulled apart, making a slight snapping sound at this time. They were still a few feet away from the top of the cliff. Tian Xueqing could see the 2 people hanging on the cliff. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. They were coming up. They were coming up. The unforeseen event happened at this moment. The rope broke, and the two people who were less than 2 feet away from the top of the cliff fell down. Tian Xueqing cried out in alarm. No! Ji Yunhuang was quick-witted. He bit the tip of his tongue and gathered all the psychokinesis in his body into his palm. He slapped GMO, and Gmo's body flew up. He fell powerlessly into the bottomless abyss. Tian Xueqing's head buzzed. Her face instantly turned pale. Ji Yunhuang. She reached out to grab Ji Yunhuang in vain, but she only grabbed air. Ji Yunhuang's body was already exhausted beyond its limit. The ice soul poison could no longer be suppressed, and it ran rampant in his body. He couldn't even move a finger now, so he didn't have the strength to fly up. Looking at the cliff that was getting farther and farther away, he was unwilling. He was just a little bit away from the gate of life. Just like his relationship with Tian Xueqing, it was always a little bit away. Perhaps this was his fate. They always missed each other. He smiled bitterly and closed his eyes. Ji Yunhuang was never the type to sacrifice himself for others. He didn't expect that there would be a day when he would sacrifice himself to save his love rival. Hearing Tian Xueqing's heart-wrenching screams, he opened his eyes again. Separated by a thin layer of clouds, Tian Xueqing's face had already become blurry. He couldn't see her expression clearly, but he could imagine that she was extremely heartbroken. What a wonderful cycle of fate. Last time, in order to save Shui Mo, she was buried in the snow mountain. This time, in order to save GMO, he fell off the cliff and died. They had all sacrificed their lives for others and let down the people they loved the most. Ji Yunhuang looked up at the layers of white clouds that were gradually thickening. He sighed as he said his last words. Xueqing, take care. Tian Xueqing's head buzzed and her entire body stiffened. Tears had already crawled all over her face, and her heart felt as though it had sunk into a deep valley filled with sharp knives. It was so painful that she felt as though she was about to vomit. That intense pain caused her entire body to spasm. She suddenly felt an immense sense of fear, as though she was about to lose the most important thing to her. She desperately tried to grab the air with her hands, but there was only air that she could not grasp. Yunhuang. Her cry was heart-wrenching, sharp and mournful, but she couldn't get any response from him. With teary eyes, she looked on helplessly as Ji Yunhuang fell through the layers of clouds and disappeared. That take care was still echoing in the valley, as though it was his final farewell. It was also his endless instructions to her. Chapter 24:34. Take care? How could she take care of herself? How could she take care of herself when she saw him fall into the abyss? Her heart ached so much that it felt like it was going to split open. How could she take care of herself? She had never thought that he would die. She had never thought that he would have a moment of helplessness. But just now, he had fallen so helplessly. She could not do anything about it. His face was so pale, and his white robe was covered in patches of red and white. It was obvious that he was severely injured. How could he survive if he fell like this? Her head buzzed, and she was about to jump off the cliff. She had forced him to his death, so she did not want to live anymore. Master! Wang Kai grabbed her trousers and shouted, Master! He is an immortal. He won't die from falling off the cliff. Don't do anything stupid. He won't die? Maybe he will still be alive. This faint hope allowed Tian Xueqing to regain some of her senses. She was really scared now. Her hands and feet were cold, and she felt as if something was going to break out of her heart. Countless memories were spinning in her mind, and every one of them had his face. He came with his sword and cut the netherworld snake in half. He hugged her in his arms and comforted her softly. Xueqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. When she found out that her master was poisoned by the netherworld poison, she panicked. He patted her back and said gently, Xueqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. When she fell off the cliff, he pulled her up and patted her. Xueqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. He had always been protecting her. When she was in danger, he descended like a god and defeated all the difficulties for her. Then, He hugged her and told her not to be afraid because he was here. Unknowingly, he had become her pillar of support. She was not afraid of any difficulties because he would come. But now he had fallen off the cliff. The clouds covered his face, and she could only hear his sigh. Xueqing, take care. She had never thought that he would say goodbye to her like this one day. She did want him to leave, but she never wanted him to die. Wang Kai's black eyes were filled with tears. It did not expect Ji Yunhuang to be so loyal. It had never thought that its master would be so sad, as if the sky had collapsed. Tian Xueqing suddenly stood up and murmured, I want to find him. I want to find him. You are right, he won't die. I won't. He turned around and wanted to run down. Wang Kai hurriedly shouted, Master, wait. Master's poison hasn't been cured yet. Tian Xueqing stood there in a daze, as though she didn't hear him clearly. She looked at Wang Kai in a daze. Wang Kai repeated again, and Tian Xueqing's eyes gradually regained focus. Wang Kai saw that its master had regained consciousness, and it could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Tian Xueqing's heart was in a mess, and her mind was barely working. Only when he saw GMO lying there did he realize that he had to detoxify his master. How could he have forgotten? How could he forget to detoxify his master? Clearly, master was the most important person to him. Could it be that she had already fallen in love with him? A thought surfaced in her mind, and her heart immediately trembled. Impossible. Impossible. She had always liked her master. It was master. But what was with the suffocating feeling in his heart? Why was she so sad for Ji Yunhuang? She had to calm down. Calm down. Save master first. Save master first. Tian Xueqing felt that there was a ball of fire burning in her heart, and it was also as if she had been frozen for 1,000 years. She was indescribably anxious and cold. Chapter 24:35. She took out a detoxification pill with trembling hands and stuffed it into Ji Mo's mouth. She wanted to apply the needle, but her trembling hands searched for the silver needle on her body. She used to be very efficient, but now she couldn't find the silver needle. Her vision was blurred and she couldn't see clearly. Her mind was also blank. Wang Kai was almost afraid of Tian Xueqing. It said softly, Master, you should take a rest first. You! She was like this now, so it was easy for her to have problems. Tian Xueqing finally found a silver needle and wanted to stick it into Ji Mo's body. Wang Kai suddenly screamed, Stop! Master! That's a poison needle! Tian Xueqing paused. Her vision was blurred and she couldn't see anything clearly. After focusing for a long time, she could see that the silver needle in her hand had been dipped in a bright green color. She hurriedly threw out the poison needle as if it was a hot potato, almost stabbing Wang Kai Piglet. Wang Kai was shocked and shouted subconsciously, Master, you almost stabbed me. It looked at Tian Xueqing subconsciously. It was stunned by what it saw. Tian Xueqing looked at it. Her eyes were misty, like the mist in the early morning. Her tears were falling down one by one. She cried miserably, like a helpless child. Gradually, her skirt was soaked by her tears. This was the first time Wang Kai had seen Tian Xueqing cry like this. In its impression, its master had always been a calm and collected divine doctor. It had never seen her cry so miserably. This was the first time she had shown the panic of a 14-year-old child. However, Tian Xueqing only lost her composure for a moment. She knew that the situation was urgent and she didn't have much time. She wiped her face and stood up. Although her voice was still trembling from crying, she had calmed down a lot. She checked GMO's pulse and then took out a red pill and fed it to GMO. She then ordered, Wang Kai, I've cured Master's poison. You take Master back and put him on a warm jade bed. Give him a clear jade pill every 2 hours. She threw a red medicine bag to Wang Kai and ran down the mountain. Wang Kai shouted behind her, Master, where are you going? Tian Xueqing didn't look back. I'm going to find him. Wang Kai, take Master back. Be good. Wang Kai looked at Tian Xueqing, who was running away, and subconsciously wanted to chase after her. However, when he saw GMO who was still unconscious, he stopped. It suddenly thought of something and took out something from the small pocket in front of its chest. It raised its hoof and threw it up. Boom! A beautiful blue firework in the shape of a lotus flower exploded in the sky. Wang Kai stared at the fireworks and prayed in its heart. Hopefully, the quadruplets would keep their word and arrive in time. Tian Xueqing ran down the mountain path and utilized her qinggong to the extreme. She was so anxious that she almost fell down several times. Ji Yunhuang, don't die. After running for an unknown amount of time, she was already exhausted, but she still ran without caring about anything else. Her tears had long dried up, leaving 2 tear stains on her delicate face. Her face was almost frozen stiff, and she couldn't feel any warmth. At the end of the run, Tian Xueqing's legs were almost numb. Every breath she took was as painful as being cut by a knife. She suddenly staggered, her legs went soft, and she fell to her knees. She had hit the ground very hard, and a layer of skin was scraped on her knee. Blood was flowing down. Chapter 24:36. She fell very hard, and a layer of skin was scraped on her knee, causing blood to flow down. She did not even bother to bandage her wound. Instead, she hurriedly sprinkled some medicine on her wound and continued to run down. When she was about to reach the bottom of the valley, she suddenly slipped and her whole body rolled down uncontrollably. At the bottom of the cliff was a deep pool, and the water was so clear that one could see the bottom. Tian Xueqing rolled down and almost fell into the pool. She ignored the pain all over her body and crawled up. She looked around and her voice was filled with fear. Ji Yunhuang, where are you? She looked around but could not find him. The fear in her heart had reached its peak. Just when she did not know what to do, her gaze suddenly froze. She then opened her eyes wide and looked at the center of the pool. There was a mist above the pool. The milky white mist lingered on the surface of the pool. From afar it looked like a white sea of clouds. The wisps of mist drifted about, and one could vaguely see something floating above. Tian Xueqing opened her eyes wide and saw that there seemed to be a white shadow above. Found him, but her heart was happy at first, but then it suddenly sank, as if there was a weight in her heart. Is he still alive? Tian Xueqing suddenly did not dare to go forward. Her heart was beating like a drum. No matter what, I have to get him out first. He is such a strong person, so he cannot die. Tian Xueqing looked at the deep pool in front of her. She took off her outer clothes and jumped in. Cold. The pool water was so cold that she almost jumped up. The cold air was like ice threads that entered her skin and wandered around her body. Her face was pale from the cold. Her long black hair was dyed in the water like a drop of ink on a piece of paper. She stared at the white shadow in front of her. Her heart was beating faster and faster, as if it was going to jump out of her chest. Close, even closer. Ji Yunhuang's white robe was floating in the water. His eyes were slightly closed, and his long eyelashes cast a shadow under his eyelids. His face was pale, and his lips were thin. The surrounding fog floated around him like clouds, lingering around his body in wisps. This scene was extremely beautiful. He quietly floated there, as if he was sleeping. Tian Xueqing finally swam to his side. She pursed her lips tightly and nudged him. Her voice was filled with hope as she gently called out, Ji Yunhuang. With this push, her heart suddenly sank. It was too cold. It was not the body temperature that a normal person should have. His body was like ice, emitting a chill. The pain hit her like an avalanche, almost suffocating her. Tian Xueqing's hands trembled violently. Her eyes turned red, but she held it back. He couldn't just let him float on the water. She couldn't just leave him here, even if it meant she had to bring him back. Tian Xueqing hugged his waist and swam with him to the edge of the water. His coolness with a slight medicinal fragrance lingered around her body. It was so familiar that she wanted to cry. Her eyes turned red and her vision blurred. Hugging him did not make her feel at ease at all. Instead, she was filled with endless panic and fear. Could he be dead? Why was his body so cold? She hugged him, but she couldn't feel any signs of life from him. He originally had the ice soul poison in his body. Previously, he was just barely suppressing it. He should have been lying on the bed and recuperating, but he ran over to save them, and now he fell into the icy pool. The more Tian Shuiqing thought about it, the more afraid she became. Her heart felt like it was being pierced by a row of needles. Chapter 24:37. When she was about to reach the shore, Tian Shuiqing suddenly felt her calf twitching. Her heart sank. She tried her best to straighten her feet and endure the numbness. She swam forward with all her might and finally reached the shore before the second wave of numbness came. When she reached the shore, the cold wind blew, causing her to shiver. She was so cold that her whole body was trembling. She took off Ji Yunhuang's drenched clothes, revealing his chest that was as white as jade. Then, she draped her coat over his body. She trembled as she checked his pulse. She felt as if her heart had been hit by a sledgehammer. Her limbs and bones were in pain. The constant heartache made her feel as if she was going to vomit her heart out. There was no pulse. There was no pulse. Tian Shuiqing's face turned pale and her eyes lost focus. He was dead? He was so powerful. Yet he was dead. Impossible. She did not believe it. Tian Shuiqing did not give up and continued to check his pulse. She exposed his chest and stared at it. There was a thin layer of frost on his face. His entire body was like an ice sculpture. There was no breath, no heartbeat, no emotional fluctuation. He was just an ice sculpture lying there quietly. There was no pulse. There was no movement. He was dead. He was dead. What should she do? What should she do? As if all the strength in her body had been sucked away, Tian Shuiqing sat there powerlessly with tears falling like rain. Her tears dripped onto his ice-cold hands, emitting wisps of white smoke. At this moment, she suddenly felt a weak pulse. Tian Shuiqing was shocked. She wiped away her tears and carefully checked his pulse. His pulse was very weak and intermittent. If not for Tian Shuiqing's attentiveness, she would not have felt it. He was still alive, but he was lingering around the gates of hell. Tian Shuiqing immediately became nervous. Her hands were trembling. She patted her face and forced herself to calm down. Don't panic. Don't panic. Time was running out. He could die at any time. Tian Shuiqing took a deep breath. She first pried open his mouth and fed him a life-extending pill. Then, she took out a silver needle and started to prick his body with difficulty. This life-extending pill was a divine medicine that she had specially developed. It could prolong a person's last breath, but it could only last for 6 hours. She didn't have anything else on her right now. She didn't bring any other medicinal herbs, so she couldn't give it to him. She could only use the silver needles to seal his acupoints to prevent the poison from spreading further. Then, she would bring him back as quickly as possible. Tian Shuiqing was calculating rapidly in her mind, but the needles in her hands were very steady. She accurately inserted them into the corresponding acupoints. Hiss, hiss, a sound rang out not far away. It was the unique sound of snakeskin sliding across the grass. It was getting closer and closer to them. Based on the sound of friction, they could tell that it was a large snake. A silver-white snake slithered forward, its tongue sticking out as it slowly approached. The snake arched its body, clearly a sign that it was about to attack. However, Tian Shuiqing did not even look at him. Even though she was sweating profusely, her movements did not slow down at all. Her movements were as smooth as flowing water. Now was the crucial moment of acupuncture, and she could not afford to be distracted. With a gust of wind, for more people appeared out of nowhere. The 4 of them were wearing the same clothes and looked exactly the same. The youngest of the quadruplets saw that Ji Yunhuang was not breathing, and her heart sank. She wanted to rush forward. "Mas?" One of them reached out his hand to stop her and covered her mouth. He said sternly, "Miss Ah Ching is performing acupuncture on Master. Don't disturb her." Chapter 24:38. One of them reached out to stop her and covered her mouth. He sternly transmitted his voice. Miss Ah Ching is performing acupuncture on Master. Don't disturb her. He looked worriedly at Ji Yun Huang, who was covered in silver needles, and Tian Xueching, who was sweating profusely. He then looked at the snake that had started to retreat. He raised his arm and made a gesture. The four twins understood and immediately split into four directions to protect the two people in the middle. One of them took care of the silver snake. With the four of them guarding them, not even a fly could enter. The time it takes for an incense stick to burn passed. 2 hours passed. Tian Xueching was so cold that she almost lost consciousness. Her head was dizzy and every breath she took was scalding hot. She was running a high fever. This fever came very quickly. Not long after, her whole body became weak and her hands started to tremble slightly. She tried her best to keep her eyes open and persevered. After another half an hour, Tian Xueching finally pulled out the silver needles. After removing the last silver needle, she wanted to stand up. However, her vision suddenly turned black and she fell down weakly. One of the four twins caught her. Tian Xueching opened her misty eyes and tried her best to wake up. However, darkness quickly attacked her and nibbled away at her consciousness. Before she lost her consciousness, she grabbed that person's sleeve and reminded him repeatedly, "Bring him back to the tranquil mountain. Remember, you must carry him flat. Do not move at all." The darkness came like a tide and completely drowned her. "Xueching, take care." Ji Yun Huang looked at her deeply and took a step back. He fell down the endless cliff. "No." Tian Xueching suddenly woke up. The darkness scattered like shooting stars. When Tian Xueching opened her eyes, she saw Ji Mo's worried face. She was stunned for a moment and her eyes were filled with confusion and helplessness. "Master." GMO touched Tian Xueching's forehead and sighed in relief. "Everything is fine now." Tian Xueching grabbed Ji Mo's sleeve. Her eyes were filled with weakness and nervousness. "Master, where is he?" Ji Mo's eyes moved. "I have already refined the antidote. I just gave it to him last night." "He has already taken the antidote? Does that mean that he is already awake?" Tian Xueching's heart was filled with joy, and her eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy. "Master, has he woken up? How is his physical condition now?" GMO looked at Tian Xueching in silence. When she opened her eyes, all her questions revolved around Ji Yun Huang. She didn't ask him how he was doing, nor did she ask herself how she was doing. GMO's silence made Tian Xueching, who had just calmed down, worry again. She carefully asked, "Master, could it be that he hasn't woken up yet?" Fear was like a tidal wave that slapped at her heart. The look in Jimo's eyes was indifferent. He was looking down at her from above. His appearance was somewhat cold. This was the first time Tian Xueching had seen GMO like this. She was stunned for a moment before she finally realized that there was something wrong with his mood. Her eyes were filled with doubt as she asked, "Master, what's wrong?" GMO looked into her eyes. His usually gentle eyes now had a hint of sharpness. "Xueching, tell Master the truth. Have you already fallen in love with Ji Yun Huang?" Tian Xueching stood there in a daze for a moment. She loves Ji Yun Huang? That's impossible. She should only feel guilty towards him. He fell down the cliff to save her master, so she felt very guilty. That's it. Furthermore, Ji Yun Huang's feelings towards her should only be transference. Chapter 2439. Furthermore, Ji Yun Huang's feelings for her should only be transference. The one he truly loved was his crown princess who had died young. The reason why he was so good to her now was only because he saw her as a substitute for that person. Tian Xueching's heart was filled with bitterness. She had never wanted to be anyone's substitute. GMO did not disturb her when he saw that she was in a daze. He only looked at her quietly, but the expression in his eyes was getting heavier and heavier. She had been thinking for a long time. Her eyes were half bright and half dark. It was obvious that she was struggling. If she did not love him, the answer should have been out of her mouth. Why was she struggling for such a long time? She was already moved, but she did not know it. Ji Mo's heart was getting heavier and heavier. Tian Xueqing finally came back to her senses. She looked straight into Ji Mo's eyes and firmly shook her head. Master, you think too much. This disciple does not love him. This disciple just feels guilty towards him. GMO looked at Tian Xueqing with a complicated expression. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he only sighed. Tian Xueqing looked at him for a while, then subconsciously looked away. She suddenly remembered that her master had not answered her question. Her heart jumped, and she asked again, Master, is he awake? GMO shook his head, and simply spat out 4 words. She's still unconscious. The poison had clearly been cured, so why was he still unconscious? Tian Xueqing only felt a burning anxiety in her heart. She could no longer lie down and wanted to get out of bed. GMO raised his hand to stop her. Xueqing, where are you going? You should take care of your body. You have been unconscious for nearly 3 days. Tian Xueqing felt as if there was a fire burning in her heart. Master, I just want to see him. I just want to see him. She did not know if she was saying this to GMO or herself. GMO's eyes were so dark that it was hard to discern his expression. It is useless even if you go. What does he mean by it is useless even if I go? She felt as if she had suddenly fallen from the sky. At that moment, her heart almost stopped beating. Master, what do you mean? She only realized that her voice was trembling when she spoke. GMO sighed. Forget it, you should go and see him yourself. Tian Xueqing's heart suddenly sank. Countless terrifying guesses appeared in her mind, but she fiercely slapped them back down. She jumped out of bed, hurriedly put on her shoes, and stumbled out. GMO stood in the same place, looking at her back as she ran away, deep in thought. Heavenly Fragrance Court. With the quadruplets guarding the door, not even a fly could enter. Seeing Tian Xueqing stumbling over, they respectfully said, Miss Ah Qing. Then they made way for her. Tian Xueqing nodded slightly and rushed into the room. With a creak, the door was pushed open, and sunlight poured into the room like a tide. It lit up the room and it also lit up him. The calming incense in the room burned slowly, hovering in the air, bringing a fragrance and tranquility to the room. A man in white was lying on the bed. He had a handsome face, a pale complexion, and thin lips. On such a beautiful spring day, when Wan seemed to have stopped in front of him, no longer moving forward, leaving him alone as cold as snow. His entire body exuded a faintly discernible chill. Tian Xueqing pursed her lips and stepped forward. Her fingertips trembled slightly. They were slightly cold as they touched his skin. The warm and soft touch almost made her cry. Although his body temperature was still somewhat low, it was much better than the coldness of a dead person before. Chapter 2440. She felt for his pulse. It pulsed faintly under her skin. He was still alive. No matter what, he was still alive. Tian Xueqing suddenly had the urge to hug him and cry. She was scared out of her wits when she saw her master's hesitant look. She thought that he was dead and would never come back. Fortunately, he was still alive. As long as he was still alive, there was hope. But since he was still alive, why did her master look hesitant? Her heart had just calmed down a little, but it immediately rose again. She took a deep breath and calmed her heart down. Then she began to examine him carefully. Tian Xueqing checked him from head to toe, and her face became paler. He was breathing, his heart was beating, and he could react instinctively to external stimuli. But he was unconscious. He did not have any consciousness at all. He was clearly lying peacefully in front of her. But Tian Xueqing felt that there was a world of distance between them. He was already in a vegetative state. On the 7th day, 2 of the quadruplets were missing. Tian Xueqing walked in with weak steps. Her face was as pale as a ghost, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was very dizzy, and the world was spinning with every step she took. She had not slept for 6 days and 6 nights. For the past few days, she had been reading all kinds of medical books like a madwoman, looking for a way to cure Ji Yunhuang. She took countless kinds of medicinal herbs and threw them into his mouth as if they were free. She also poured bowl after bowl of medicinal soup into his mouth. Then, as if waiting for a verdict, she stayed by his side and stared at him, hoping for a miracle to happen. But it was useless. There was no effect at all. It was not like this had never happened before. In fact, Tian Xueqing had cured many people who were in a vegetative state, and she had found many ways to cure them, but none of those methods worked on him. Was it because he was a deity? She immediately went to look for ways to cure him. Over the past few days, she had tried all kinds of methods and remedies, but none of them worked. No matter how hard she worked for days and nights without sleep, she could only watch him lose his life bit by bit. His heartbeat became slower and slower, and his pulse became weaker and weaker. His body became colder and colder. He was dying bit by bit, but she could not do anything about it. Tian Xueqing walked to the bedside and looked at the face of the person lying on the bed, which seemed to be carved from cold jade. She was in a trance. His legs went soft, and he fell to the ground, his vision turning black. She held his wrist that was as cold as snow, and the coldness flowed through her pores, penetrating her limbs and bones. His pulse was so weak that it almost stopped a few times. If this continued, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to survive the night. For the first time, she felt powerless. She had healed everyone in the world, but she could not wake him up. She didn't owe anyone a debt, but he was the only one she regretted. His tears dripped onto her hand, but she did not seem to feel it. She only held on tightly to his hand and said with a trembling voice, "Ji Yunhuang, did you purposely smash my plaque? Do you think I owe you something? I haven't even blamed you for treating me as a substitute, but you're blaming me first? How can you be so unreasonable? You're the one in the wrong. You're the one in the wrong." Tian Xueqing's consciousness was already in a trance. She hadn't slept for several days and nights, so her mind was in a mess. She was almost unconsciously repeating this sentence. Chapter 24:41. She grabbed his wrist and did not let go for even a moment. She was afraid that if she let go, he would leave without a sound. Therefore, no matter how scared she was, no matter how terrified she was, she still held onto his wrist tightly. Only by feeling his pulse could she feel a little more at ease. Although his pulse was getting weaker and weaker, just like her heart was getting heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she could no longer feel his pulse. He died. It was as if she had been struck by lightning in the middle of a rainstorm. She jumped up, and with a flustered and frightened body, she reached for his chest in a flurry, but she couldn't feel even the slightest beat. Her mind was blank, and the world seemed to have gone silent. She could not hear anything, and she could not see anything. She could only rely on her doctor's instinct to take out a pill and feed it to him. Then, she quickly and mechanically treated him. After the whole procedure, her mind was blank. She was so flustered that she felt as if the whole world was trembling. She felt his pulse again, but there was still no pulse. She was so flustered that she almost suffocated. She stumbled and ran outside. Her voice was trembling like an autumn leaf in the wind. "Call my master! Quickly call my master!" Her voice was uncontrollably high, and it was almost mournful. The twins who were guarding the door looked at each other and assigned the tasks. One was responsible for finding GMO, and the other was responsible for going in to check the situation. Tian Xueqing suddenly tripped on the blanket on the ground and fell heavily on the ground. She was already exhausted, and with this fall, her vision was quickly invaded by darkness, and she fell into a deep coma. She was half conscious and half awake. She was still staring at the bed, hoping that the person would get up and help her up. However, he did not even move a finger. The darkness was like a tide, and it instantly drowned her. Her consciousness went up and down in the tide for an unknown amount of time. Suddenly, there was a bright light in front of her eyes. She had a dream that spanned 100 years. When GMO arrived, Tian Xueqing was still lying on the bed, still unconscious. The four twins placed her and Ji Yunhuang side by side. Unknowingly, the two's hands were intertwined. Tian Xueqing's consciousness seemed to be trapped somewhere. She was in a deep sleep, and no matter how much she was called, she would not wake up. Tears kept falling from the corners of her eyes, wetting the bedding under her body drop by drop. No matter how hard he tried, his disciple wouldn't wake up. Even though GMO was usually calm, at this moment he was somewhat anxious. She seemed to be possessed by a nightmare. GMO patted his little face. Xueqing, wake up. Xueqing. More and more tears flowed from Tian Xueqing's eyes, and she gradually began to sob softly. However, she still could not open her eyes. GMO took out a silver needle and was about to insert it when he heard the unconscious Tian Xueqing suddenly sob, "Yun Huang." GMO's hand paused, and his heart sank. He sighed. She had really fallen in love with him. But Ji Yun Huang. After the dream ended, Tian Xueqing slowly opened her eyes. In her watery eyes, the sadness was exceptionally clear, like a ball of thick ink that couldn't be dissolved. Her eyes were empty, confused, and filled with despair that did not belong to her age. When he opened his eyes, he saw Ji Mo's worried face. She was still holding Ji Yunhuang's pulse in her hand, but there was still no movement. The heart-wrenching pain came after 100 years. It was so painful that it penetrated her heart. As if she did not see GMO, she turned her head and faced Ji Yunhuang. She stared at his pale face and cried. She curled herself up into a small ball and locked herself in his embrace. Her hoarse voice trembled intensely as she said, "Yun Huang, do you blame me? Guess what happened to Xueqing? Monthly votes, monthly vote. Hurry up and save the sleeping prince." Chapter 2442. She placed her small hand in Ji Yunhuang's palm and squeezed her body into his embrace, as if she was afraid of the cold. Her body was shivering from the cold, but she refused to leave. Her voice was small and weak like a whisper in the wind. "You should blame me. I also hate myself. How could I?" Her voice trembled violently, and she was in so much pain that she could not speak. After a long time, she finally managed to speak. "How could I forget you? How could I forget you?" Forget him, hurt him, and finally forced him to his death. She had loved him so much in the past. "It doesn't matter if you resent me or blame me. Can you wake up first? You can only take revenge on me after you wake up, right? If you don't wake up, how can you see how heartbroken I am?" Tian Xueqing hugged Ji Yunhuang's waist as if she was hugging a block of ice. Her face was full of tears and her watery black eyes were filled with pain. There was no reply for a long time. She was destined not to hear a reply. "You still hate me. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to bear to see me so sad. What can I do to make you feel better? Can you tell me?" She was in so much pain that she was not clear-headed. She could only rely on her stubbornness to look deeply at Ji Yunhuang, as if she was looking at her only salvation in this life. "Xueqing, he's already dead." Seeing her in such despair, Ji Mo's heart ached terribly. However, this could not go on. She was not clear-headed at the moment. If he did not wake her up, the consequences would be unimaginable. "No!" Tian Xueqing's voice was so sharp that it was almost ear-piercing. GMO was also shocked by the strong emotions that suddenly erupted from her body. As if she had realized this, Tian Xueqing's voice softened again. "He won't die. Master, he's a deity. Have you forgotten?" Xueqing. "Master, can you not say any more? I beg you, let me stay with him for a while. Just a while will do." Her voice eventually became weak, like a leaf that had been blown away by a strong wind. She looked at GMO, her eyes filled with pain and pleading. GMO's lips moved and he reached out his hand to pat her. However, he paused. Accompanied by a sigh, he turned around and left. His low voice was like a calm dream. "Xueqing, no matter what, you still have Master. You're not alone." The door was pushed open and then closed with a creak. The sound of footsteps faded away, leaving behind a mottled floor. Tian Xueqing heavily closed her eyes as tears flowed down her cheeks. Jimo's words before he left reverberated in her mind, stirring up huge waves in her heart. "Master, you don't know. You don't know that when he left, He dug a hole in my heart. A hole that pierced through his heart. I have nothing left. Her heart ached to the extreme. Every time she breathed, it hurt intensely. This kind of mental pain was accompanied by a huge emptiness. It made her feel like she was hovering between life and death. At the same time, she was also confused. She curled her body into a ball like a shrimp, and her consciousness was in so much pain that she was about to faint. She fiercely hugged him, but her voice was soft and gentle, and it contained a deep pain. Ji Yunhuang, I already have nothing left. What else do you want? I'll let you do whatever you want of me. In fact, the most painful ones were never the dead, but the living who were suffering in a life worse than death. It was truly hell. It was never physical torture, but mental desolation. Tian Xueqing closed her eyes and her consciousness returned to silence. Her weak voice was like a whisper in the wind. You've already sent me to hell. In her daze, she seemed to see Ji Yunhuang sit up. Chapter 24:43. Suddenly, he slowly walked over from the void. His body was surrounded by a faint halo, and he was still the elegant and handsome High Immortal. She stood there in a daze, not daring to blink her eyes. She was afraid that if she blinked, he would disappear again. The halo was getting closer and closer to her. He stood in front of her and stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to wipe away the tears on her face, but he put it down again. Tian Xueqing held her breath and looked at him in a daze for a moment. She finally reacted and subconsciously wanted to hug him, but she did not expect that she would smash him into pieces. The golden light scattered in all directions and floated in the air like a galaxy. Then, the golden light slowly condensed into a human figure and reappeared in front of her. You! Tian Xueqing's tears fell again. He was in the void, hugging her weakly. His body's cold and delicate fragrance surrounded her. A soft voice sounded in her mind with a hint of helplessness. Xueqing? Tian Xueqing looked at him with teary eyes, and her voice was full of hope. Can you come back? I miss you very much. Ji Yunhuang's body seemed to stiffen, and he did not speak for a long time. Finally, he sighed. Xueqing, I'm sorry. Forget me. The golden light condensed in his hand, and he placed his hand on her long hair and stroked it. His warm breath made her greedy, and his touch made her heart feel peaceful. Her heart became incomparably peaceful, and the pain and despair of the past few days slowly faded away. Some of the unforgettable scenes in her mind slowly faded away. She was shocked, and she struggled to break free. Never! The dream came to an abrupt end, and she suddenly opened her eyes. It was still the same room and the same bed. He was still lying there without making a sound. Tian Xueqing stared at the person on the bed, and her eyes were a little empty. The night was cold, and the moonlight was like water. Cicadas were chirping non-stop outside the window, and along with the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the reflection of the big round moon, it was a summer day. Outside the window, the hot wind blew, but inside the room, it was a little cold. She subconsciously stretched out her hand and touched Ji Yunhuang's long eyelashes. When his eyelashes touched her palm, it was itchy and trembling, and her heart also trembled. She originally wanted to leave after touching him, but she lingered on. Her little hand brushed past his slightly closed eyes, his high nose bridge, and his thin lips. She closed her eyes and recalled the warmth in her short dream, as well as the faint and helpless apology that came from the void. She held his hand that was hanging by the side of the bed. His hand was cold, and no matter how she held it, she couldn't warm it up. Her heart was also turning cold inch by inch. This hand had once caressed every part of her body. This hand had once mercilessly pushed her away. This hand had once filled her with despair. It was also this hand that had saved her and her master. It was also this hand that had held her hand and told her not to be afraid. This hand had once dragged her to heaven, and it had also once pushed her into hell. Now, this hand was powerless to do anything else. No matter how hard she tried to grab it, it would not give her any reaction. She pressed her face against the hand and closed her eyes slightly. Yun Huang, when I was dragged underground by the ghost Rot-Tan 100 years ago, I did blame you, but I didn't hate you. You didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't love me. I hated myself for my wishful thinking. So when I died, I swore to the heavens that I would forget you in my next life and never meet you again. Her voice was very calm, empty and calm. Chapter 24:44. No one answered. She looked at the moonlight outside the window, lost in thought as she stared at the silver floating in the air. Her long eyelashes formed a row of shadows under her eyelids. Her face was as pale as snow, like a fragile porcelain doll. The room was very quiet. The cicadas outside the room seemed to have sensed the unusual atmosphere and tactfully stopped chirping. The sounds of the outside world gradually faded away. It was as if she had been placed in a vacuum, isolated from the rest of the world. "But now I hate you very much," she said softly. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, like the wings of a butterfly. She repeated herself, "Ji Yun Huang, did you hear that? I hate you very much. In our previous life, you clearly fell in love with me. So why were you so heartless to me? You treated Shumo better than me. You were always cold to me. Whether I cried or was in pain, you didn't care about me. Yun Huang, I loved you so much that I didn't feel like myself anymore. I couldn't extricate myself. If I knew your feelings for me, I wouldn't have begged for death just to forget you. In this life, I really did forget you, but you appeared in front of me again. You used such a tragic method to remind me of the past. You disrupted my 2 lives, and now you want to make up for it by simply erasing my memories?" Tian Xueqing's eyes were big and empty. The moonlight was bright, but it didn't leave a trace of light in her eyes. She slowly spat out 2 words with determination and ruthlessness. "Absolutely not. I won't forgive you, and I won't forgive myself either." Her hand gently brushed against his cold face, which was as cold as jade to the touch. She knew that his soul had already left long ago, leaving only an empty shell here, which only made her sad. She looked at his face and suddenly revealed a smile, as if she had finally figured something out. Tian Xueqing lowered her head and planted a kiss on his cold lips. "If you don't accompany me, I'll accompany you. Wait for me." No one knew how Tian Xueqing carried Ji Yun Huang out. The wind on the cliff was very strong, causing people to feel cold all over. Her long hair fluttered in the wind as she carried him. Her green dress fluttered in the wind, like a butterfly that was about to flap its wings and fly away. She hugged him strenuously as she looked at the bottomless abyss below her. As she looked at the floating white clouds, a myriad of emotions seemed to flash through her eyes. "Yun Huang, do you know why I chose this place?" Under the moonlight, his face was as pale as snow, quietly lying in her arms. The wind messed up his hair, his clothes. She faintly smiled and raised her hand to carefully tidy up his clothes. Then, she tidied her hair and leaned down to kiss him on the lips. She whispered, "Because this is the only way to catch up to you. You won't abandon me again." Hugging him, he jumped down. The wind whistled, blowing like a knife. The force of the fall grew stronger and stronger. The huge sense of weightlessness almost made her heart burst, but she hugged him tightly and closed her eyes, waiting for the last moment to come. Bang! With a loud bang, Tian Xueqing seemed to have bumped into something. Everything in front of her eyes turned black, and darkness flooded her like a tidal wave. At the last moment before she lost consciousness, she hugged Ji Yun Huang tightly in her arms. Since they couldn't be together in life, then they might as well die together. In the sky, on the clouds, a man and a woman were sitting. The man was wearing a loose robe with big sleeves. His hair was as black as ink, and his clothes were as white as the clouds. His appearance was as if it was carved out of ice, making people feel that it was blasphemous to look at him. Chapter 24:45. However, he was holding a red-clothed girl in his arms. The red-clothed girl had an elegant appearance. Her eyes were big and her mouth was small. When she curled her lips slightly, 2 dimples could be seen at the corners of her lips. Her beauty revealed a hint of laziness, but there was also a hint of comfort in her laziness. At this moment, the girl raised her head and looked at him. Great God! Is this the best moment you were talking about? The man held her with one hand and calmly kept a transparent net in his other hand. He only replied with a single word, yes. This man and woman were naturally the ancestor Shinjuli and the devil master Ningshuima. In the net, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang were tightly hugging each other. It was as if they couldn't be separated even if heaven and earth collapsed. Ningshuima glanced at the net and saw that Tian Xueqing's eyes were tightly closed. Her two small hands were tightly gripping Ji Yunhuang's waist. Her knuckles were white and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her lips. Her small face was buried in Ji Yunhuang's arms, as if she had found the person she could rely on for the rest of her life. The two of them were hugging each other like a pair of mandarin ducks. Ning Shuima glanced at the great god beside her. I feel that you could have taken action when Ji Yunhuang was about to die. Why did you have to drag out such a tragic ending? Shinjuli finally lifted the two people into the clouds. His finger touched Ji Yunhuang's wrist. After a while, he removed his hand and replied casually, if I didn't force her into a desperate situation, how would she be able to break through the blood curse of her previous life and regain her memories? He glanced at Tian Xueqing and sighed. This blood curse can only be broken by herself. Outsiders can't help her at all. Ning Shuima finally understood why Shinjuli took action so late. She finally felt relieved. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and asked, can he still be saved? Of course. Shinjuli answered confidently. It won't be easy for anyone to die in front of me. The thin rays of sunlight danced on the ground, forming spots of light. On the bed in the room, Ji Yunhuang slowly opened his eyes. At first, he seemed to be in a daze, but after a while, his eyes became clear. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look to the side. There was a woman lying next to his arm. This woman was obviously very sleepy. Her eyes were closed and she was in a deep sleep. However, her fingers were tightly gripping his hand, as if she was afraid that he would run away. Xueqing. The sunlight danced on the side of her face, softening her cheeks. She fluttered her eyelashes uncomfortably. Xueqing. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand and shielded her face from the light. His gaze was gentle as he lowered his head and gently kissed her on her trembling eyelashes. Tian Xueqing moaned in her sleep, as if she was sleep-talking. Yunhuang, don't leave me behind. Her words lit up Ji Yunhuang's eyes. He held her hand tightly, as if he was holding the most important treasure in his life. Of course, he wouldn't abandon her. Never again. He had searched for her for 100 years, and now he had finally found her. He checked his body and found that all the injuries had disappeared without a trace. Other than the slight weakness in his body, he was fine. His eyes flickered. Dizun's technique. He knew very well that he would definitely die at that time. Even he himself was powerless to save the situation. Only Dizun could pull him back from the gates of hell and help him recover so quickly. He lowered his eyes and looked at the person lying on the bed who didn't seem to be sleeping comfortably. His heart warmed. He raised his hand and moved her onto the bed, nestling her shoulder to shoulder with him. She seemed to finally feel comfortable. Her body automatically snuggled up to him, and she hugged his arm as she finally fell asleep. Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang's story has basically come to an end. There will be some sweet interactions between the great god and Shuima later. On the last day of the month, I will roll around and act cute to beg for monthly votes, monthly votes, monthly votes. Important things have to be said 3 times. There will be no updates in the early hours of the morning, so there is no need for everyone to stay up late. For the sake of everyone's health, the update time will be changed to around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 2446. Her current posture was the same as when she first came to his side 100 years ago. She loved him like a mad woman and was greedy for his warmth. When he was asleep, she would snuggle up to him and sleep contentedly just like now at that time, although he hated her instinctively. When he woke up and saw her like this, His heart would soften and he would quietly move his arm away from her embrace so as not to wake her up. However, later on, she truly despaired of him. Even when she slept beside him, she would curl up into a ball and never come close to him again, causing him to feel disappointed for no reason. Even when he took her into his arms while she was asleep, her body was stiff and filled with a strong sense of repulsion. The moment he loosened his grip, she would roll far away. She would rather stick her body against the wall than take a step closer to him. Only when he lost her did he realize how much he longed for her to completely trust and rely on that position. For 100 years, he had dreamt of her in this position countless times. But when he woke up, he would always be alone. Now, she was sleeping beside him in this position again. He closed his eyes slightly and quietly stretched out his arm to pull her into his embrace. She was like a kitten snuggling into his embrace. He quietly breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that once he hugged her, he would never let go again. This hug would last until the end of time and they would never be separated. He also knew that they still had a long way to go. He had to supervise her cultivation and solve the problem between her and GMO. There were still many things he had to do. However, as long as she could stay by his side, he could solve all of those problems one by one. 100 years of yearning, 100 years of yearning. Now that he had her in his embrace, how could an ordinary hug be enough to satisfy him? As Ji Yunhuang hugged her, he wanted to kiss her. Kiss her. Kiss her. He wanted to feel the warmest reality. He looked at her in his embrace. If he remembered correctly, today was her 15th birthday and she could be considered an adult. He wanted to give her an unforgettable birthday present. He flipped over and lightly pressed down on her. His lips covered hers. On a hillside covered in green grass, Shun Jili lazily sat on a large rock with a guqin placed horizontally on his lap. His 10 fingers gently plucked the strings of the guqin, and the sound of the guqin flowed out, weaving a mirror in the air. What appeared in the mirror was Ji Yunhuang's pair. Ning Shuamo rested her chin on her hand and looked at the scene in the mirror with great interest. Seeing Ji Yunhuang wake up in a daze, seeing him put Tian Shueching on the bed, seeing him pull her into his embrace. She loved watching this kind of couple drama. It gave her a sense of accomplishment. Shwa! The wavy mirror suddenly disappeared, and the description of the pair could no longer be seen. She turned around and saw Shun Jili looking at her with a smile that was not a smile. Are you addicted to this kind of drama? Ning Shuama was still somewhat unsatisfied. She raised her hand and touched her nose. She coughed and said, It's all right. This kind of drama of a broken mirror being reunited is originally very interesting. She looked at Shun Jili seriously and laughed. She teased him. You're in such a hurry to remove it because you're afraid that I'll see something that I shouldn't see? Aha, don't worry. Ji Yunhuang has just woken up from a serious illness, and Tian Shueching is also sleeping from exhaustion. They won't really do anything. At most, they'll kiss and hug each other. This kind of drama doesn't need to be censored. I've seen it before in kindergarten. Before she could finish her words, her body suddenly flew up. When she came back to her senses, she had already landed in Shun Jili's embrace. Chapter 2447. Although she was not short, she was petite and exquisite in Shun Jili's arms. They fit perfectly. Shun Jili lifted her chin with his fingertips. You've seen it in kindergarten? Have you practiced it before? His voice was deep and gloomy, as if it had the power to hook one's soul. Ning Shuama held his fingertips and subconsciously sensed danger. She hurriedly shook her head. No, absolutely not. This great god was a vinegar jar. She didn't want him to upset her. Shun Jili looked down at her in his arms. She had been on her period for the past few days, and he had not been intimate with her for 4 days. Before he had tasted it, he was a ruthless god. Even if there was a beauty dancing in front of him, he would still be able to sit in his arms. But since he was with her, he could not leave her beauty. He was almost insatiable every night. He would only let her go when her period came. Ning Shuama did not want to provoke him, so she would deliberately stay away from him during these few days. Ning Shuama was lying on his lap. She could not be more familiar with him. Even the subtle changes in his body could not escape her touch. She could clearly feel that his body, which had always been cold, was gradually heating up. When she raised her head, she looked into his extremely dark eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to turn around and jump up, but he used one of his arms to stop her. His fingertips touched her red lips. "Shuama, it's boring to look at other people. Why don't you do the real version with me?" How could this Almighty say such ambiguous words in such an open and above-board manner? Not only did he say it openly, but he also did it openly. His fingers had already started to pick up her lapel. Ning Shuama quickly held his hand. Although people did not often come to this hillside, it did not mean that no one would come. She did not want to have sex with him here. God, calm down. Once Shinjili's interest was piqued, he couldn't remain calm. With a wave of his hand, he set up a barrier around himself. Then, with a flip of his body, he pressed Ning Shuama onto a long-haired emerald green blanket. He leaned over and looked at her. His handsome face was right above her. His black hair flowed like water, flowing over her face and neck. It was as if it could flow into her heart. "Shuama, you have to pay the price for watching porn." Ning Shuama. She wanted to cry but had no tears. What kind of movie was she watching? He couldn't even be considered a rank. Yet, she had to accompany him in a performance of the restricted level. Sometimes it was not a good thing to have a husband who could set up enchantments, because once he was in the mood, she could be with him on any occasion. Because even if it was a busy city, as long as he set up a barrier, no one would be able to discover the situation inside the barrier. He could do whatever he wanted to her. His kiss landed, and along with the kiss, his hands. The temperature gradually rose. Accompanied by the sound of each other's breathing, their clothes gradually became messy. Ning Shuama raised her hands and hugged his neck, responding to him wholeheartedly. Well, she actually wanted him too. Just as they were about to meet in the Red City, a white light suddenly shrouded Shinjili. After a while, the white light dissipated, and Shinjili's figure appeared again. Both of them froze at the same time. Shinjili, who looked like a baby, sat on Ning Shuama. The white robe he was wearing could change its size according to his body. Now, the large white robe had become a small robe. The white robe was loose, and one could faintly see the fair and delicate skin underneath. Ning Shuama. Shinjili. Chapter 24:48. He cursed under his breath and rolled to the side. Then, he wrapped his robe tightly around his small body. The second punishment had arrived. He had returned to being a child. Ning Shuama also sat up. As she looked at him who had turned into a 7- or 8-year-old child, she couldn't help but laugh. She lifted him up and kissed him on the forehead. "Little fellow, we've already completed the first mission. We should go find the heavenly Tao stone and ask about the second mission." She loved to tease little Shotas the most, especially the great god that had turned into a little Shota. She loved him so much that she couldn't bear to part with him. A moment ago he had been touching her up and down, but now she wanted to touch him up and down. Not only had she kissed him on the forehead, but she had also pinched his arms and legs. They had felt extremely good to the touch. His skin was soft and smooth like tofu, making one want to take a bite or two. She had really bitten him twice on his arm. Of course, she couldn't bear to bite him. She had only used her teeth to lightly grind against him. Just these 2 bites had left 2 rows of shallow teeth marks on his delicate skin. As she was playing with him, she suddenly sensed something. She looked up and her heart skipped a beat. Shinjili lowered his eyes to look at her. His lips were curved in a faint smile. His eyes were as deep as the sea, and the waves of light seemed as if they would drown her. He clearly had the appearance of a child, but his eyes were like an adult's. This caused Ning Shuama's heart to skip a beat. "You can continue." Shinjili calmly laid down in her arms. Not only did he not have the slightest intention of avoiding her groping, but he even put on a posture of allowing her to do whatever she wanted. He leaned his head down and rested his chin on her shoulder. His small mouth nearly bit her ear. Shuama, I seem to have told you that even if I return to being a child, I am still an adult in certain aspects. I can still do adult things. Do you want to give it a try? Ning Shuema. She didn't have such a heavy taste. She dryly laughed and quickly placed him on the ground. She quickly changed the topic. Should we go to Carefree Island to look for the heavenly Tao stone? Shun Jili flicked his little robe and said indifferently, We'll go find it in 3 days. He didn't want Rong Yuetian to see him like this, in case that fellow suffered internal injuries from holding back her laughter. Fortunately, he had already completed one of the heavenly Tao's punishments. This time, he would only return to his youth for 3 days. It wouldn't be too late for him to look for the heavenly Tao stone after 3 days. Ning Shuama understood Shin Jili's thoughts. She rolled her eyes and said, Why don't we go to the highest peak of Tianshu Mountain? Perhaps he would recover faster there. Shin Jili shook his head slightly. His return to youth this time was different from before. Cultivating in the Heavenly Book Mountains was of no use. Just as he was about to say something, the sky outside suddenly darkened, as if dark clouds had covered the sun. Ning Shuama subconsciously raised her head to take a look and saw a huge blue object floating in the air. Her eyes suddenly widened. Qilin. It was actually a water kirin. The kirin was the size of a small mountain. Its scales were as large as bowls, and they were like blue jade that shimmered under the moonlight. Its wings stretched out, blocking out the moonlight. At this time, its 2 brilliant eyes were searching downwards. Its mouth was muttering to itself, Strange. I clearly smelled Master's aura here, so how come I can't find it? Its voice was rough and hoarse, but it didn't lose its clarity. You must have smelled wrong again. Your sense of smell has never been so sensitive. You've made this mistake more than once. Chapter 2449. You must have smelled wrongly again. Your sense of smell has never been that sensitive, and you have made this mistake more than once. A delicate female voice sounded out. Ning Shuama looked towards the direction of the voice and realized that there was a fire phoenix circling above the Qilin. That fire phoenix was much smaller than the water Qilin and was covered by the Qilin's figure. If it didn't make a sound, Ning Shuama wouldn't be able to see it. I clearly felt it the most obvious this time. The water Qilin was unconvinced. I have heard this sentence 10 times in the past 100 years. I have heard it so many times that calluses are forming in my ears. The fire phoenix exposed its shortcomings without holding back. Hong Ti, if you think I can't find it, you can find it yourself. The water Qilin was also unhappy. If I can find it myself, why would I follow you? Do you think I want to be together with a stupid Qilin? The fire phoenix was also angry. The scales on the water Qilin's body stood up. It was originally anxious because it missed again, and now it was agitated by the fire phoenix's words. It was instantly enraged and flapped its wings. Hong Ti, I have tolerated you for a long time. The flapping of its wings created a hurricane and blew the fire phoenix up above, causing it to stagger and lose 2 of its feathers. The fire phoenix's eyes were completely red. Stinky Qilin, you dare to make a move on me. It flapped its wings and raging flames burst out from its wings. A ball of flames rolled towards the water Qilin. The water Qilin had only fanned the wind and didn't expect the other party to immediately set fire to it. This fire was the red lotus hellfire that could burn everything. It was obvious that this phoenix was truly angry. The water Qilin was also angry and didn't want to be outdone. It opened its mouth and a huge wave of water pounced towards the red lotus hellfire. Qi! Water could subdue fire, not to mention that this water was the Qilin's true yang water which could subdue all the fire in the world. The red lotus hellfire that the fire phoenix fanned out was scattered by the water and not a single spark was left. Not to mention, a strand of water even splashed onto the fire phoenix's body. Although it didn't cause any substantial damage to it, it still drenched its feathers and made it look like a drowned rat. Fire phoenix. You? That pair of ruby-like eyes had tears rolling around. You bullied me. The water Qilin raised his head to look at the sorry figure of the fire phoenix and was stunned. I didn't do it on purpose. It also knew that it was in trouble. After thinking for a while, it flapped its wings again, trying to dry its feathers. This time, the wind was much gentler, but the fire phoenix obviously did not buy it. This figure flashed and dodged the wind. Blinking its eyes, tears rolled down its cheeks. You bully me because I can't find Master. I don't want to be with you anymore. I'll go find him myself. He turned around and was about to fly away. The water Qilin hurriedly stopped it. I already said that I didn't do it on purpose. You spat out fire first. You were the one who fanned first. Fire Phoenix shouted. All right, it's my fault. Don't be angry. The water Qilin held the thought of a good man not fighting with a woman and started to coax that phoenix. In order to make it happy, the water Qilin even opened its mouth and blew out an even gentler wind. Come, let me dry your feathers. The fire phoenix snorted and shook its feathers, shaking off all the water. I don't need your hypocrisy. I can dry it myself. Although its mouth was still unforgiving, at least it didn't have the intention to fly away alone. It circled around the grassland on the hillside. There isn't even a single human hair here. Master is obviously not here. It's the last day of the month. If you still have monthly tickets, quickly throw them out. Wax. Chapter 2450. Ning Shuama's eyes lit up when she saw the two flying creatures in the sky. They were Hong Ti and Little Apple. She did not expect the two of them to be together. They even found their way here. She was about to greet them when she felt a grip on her hand. Shin Jili held her hand. She looked at him in surprise. Shin Jili shook his head at her. Ning Shuama was stunned for a moment before she understood. The Almighty had returned to his youth. He did not want Little Apple and Hong Ti to see his current appearance. It seemed that she could not meet the two of them for the time being. She would wait for the Almighty to recover. Ning Shuama had just thought of this when there was a loud bang above her head. The impenetrable wizardry barrier broke on its own and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shin Jili was speechless. Ning Shuama was speechless. I did not do anything. The wizardry barrier broke and the two of them appeared on the grassy slope. Little Apple and Hong Ti, who were flying in the sky, had sharp eyes. They immediately cheered and rushed down. Master! Master! You really came back to life. I knew you would not die. Master, I did not look for you for 100 years in vain. I finally found you. Master, when did you come back to life? Where have you been for the past 100 years? Master, Hong Ti missed you so much. Master, Little Apple and Hong Ti turned into their human forms and surrounded Ning Shuama, chattering nonstop. They were too excited. Once they started talking, they could not stop. They threw out a series of questions. Ning Shuama did not know which one to answer first. They had not seen each other for 100 years. Both of them had changed a lot. After Little Apple turned into his human form, he looked like a 13 or 14-year-old boy. Although he still looked childish, he had the handsome looks of a teenager. His every move was vigorous. Hong Ti had also grown up quite a bit. She was much older than Little Apple, but her skills were not as high as Little Apple's. Her human form also looked younger than Little Apple's. She looked like she was 11 or 12 years old. Her fiery red body made her look very spirited. Hong Ti had always been clingy. The moment she saw Ning Shuama, she stuck to her side, her small hand holding onto Ning Shuama's sleeve without letting go. Little Apple had also forgotten that he was already a handsome young man. The moment he saw Ning Shuama, he instinctively leaned over, wishing that Ning Shuama could pat his head again. However, before he could reach Ning Shuama, he was stopped by a gaze. That gaze was like an icy spring, causing Little Apple to shiver all over. He raised his head and his gaze met the eyes of the child in Ning Shuama's arms. That child's appearance was naturally indescribable. She was unbelievably beautiful, but her aura was extremely intimidating at such a young age. Especially the pair of dark blue eyes, which made Little Apple, who had always been bold, tremble in fear. He blurted out, "Master, who is this baby in your arms?" Is it little Nienmo? He is already so big. He looks so handsome, just like you. Shinjili was speechless. Ning Shuama couldn't help but laugh. The great master looked like her? She looked at Shinjili teasingly. Shinjili glanced at Little Apple coldly. Little Apple, are you blind? Can't you even recognize me? When he spoke, he used his real voice. Little Apple trembled and suddenly widened his eyes. Di-Zun. Little Hong Ti was also shocked. She had always been afraid of Shinjili. Chapter 24:51. She also trembled and subconsciously let go of Ning Shuama's skirt. She took a step back and blurted out, Di-Zun? How did Di-Zun become so small? Is it a fetish? The long river setting includes fluttering Hong Ti revealed its original form. When it spread its wings, even the sunset lost its color. Ning Shuama sat on Hong Ti's back. In order to show off its ability, Hong Ti flew as fast as lightning. The clouds passed under its wings, and it flew very happily. Compared to the cheerful Hong Ti, Little Apple was much more miserable. It also revealed its original form. On its back was a baby version of Shinjili. This great god was pocket-sized, but his aura was not pocket-sized at all. He was still shockingly powerful. More importantly, he had too many things to do. This great god's destination was the Tianshu mountain. Ning Shuama naturally wanted to follow him. Kiran and Hong Ti both wanted to carry their master. According to Ning Shuama's idea, she and the great god should ride together so that she could take care of him. However, this great god did not know what was wrong with his brain. He actually suggested that the two of them ride on two separate horses. Moreover, he chose Kiran to be his mount. Hong Ti won the right to ride its master, so it naturally cheered, carried Ning Shuama and flew away. It chatted with its master all the way, and its feathers were dancing happily. Kiran was angry but did not dare to say anything. After revealing its original form, it bowed and asked Di-Zun to jump on its back. However, it did not expect Di-Zun to be so fussy at this time. He did not want to jump on its back himself. Instead, he asked Kiran to shrink to the size of a small horse. Then, he bowed and asked Di-Zun to step on its own. After Di-Zun sat down, he asked Kiran to grow bigger and fly away. Kiran was an impatient person. When it saw Hong Ti carrying Ning Shuama far away, its heart was already burning. As soon as Di-Zun sat down, it immediately returned to its original size. It flapped its wings and was about to fly away. Fly flat. You must be steady. The ancestor's finger tapped on its scales as he coldly instructed. Kiran's body stiffened. He no longer dared to fly recklessly and could only fly steadily. After flying, it realized that this venerable sovereign was extraordinarily troublesome. Couldn't fly fast, nor could it fly slowly. Couldn't dive or soar into the sky. It had to fly steadily like an airplane. It still had to set up a barrier for the old man because he was afraid of the wind. If the wind got a little stronger, he would take off its Chilan plate. Kiran's speed was originally much faster than Hong Ti, but now it could no longer catch up to Hong Ti because the old man on its back was moving at a constant speed. Kiran was full of resentment. He did not understand what the Almighty was up to. It also sensed the Almighty on its back. He was meditating on its back with his eyes lowered like a Buddha. The little Chilan listened to little Hongti and Ning Shuama's chatter in front of him. Then, he looked at the silent great deity on top of him, who clearly didn't have any intention of talking. He didn't give up and had a belly full of questions he wanted to ask. Di-Zun, how did my master come back to life? There was no response from its back. Little Apple felt a little suffocated and changed the topic. Di-Zun, where is little Nienma? He should have been born, right? Why don't I see him? There was still no response from its back. The Almighty seemed to have fallen asleep on its back and did not respond at all. A ball of fire ignited in Little Apple's heart. It shook its body in dissatisfaction. Di-Zun, please say something. Chapter 24:52. Shinjili, who was on its back, was caught off guard. He slipped on its back and almost fell off. Shinjuli's scales suddenly tightened. He grabbed one of its protruding scales and said, "Little Apple, do you want me to peel off your skin? Why are you shaking?" Little Apple was also shocked. It didn't expect that its shaking would have such a big effect. With Dizun's martial arts, even if it did a few backflips in the air, he should be able to sit as steady as Mount Tai, right? Dizun, did you? Dizun not only became smaller, but also lost his martial arts? Shut up. Shinjuli only replied with 2 words. As expected, Little Apple stopped talking. Without waiting for his orders, it flew quickly and steadily. After Shinjuli steadied himself, he looked at Ning Shuama, who was on the flying phoenix in front of him. He exhaled slightly and closed his eyes again. This time he had returned to his youth. It was really different from before. Previously, even if he had the appearance of a child, he would at most lose a lot of his psychokinesis. It wouldn't be like this time, where all his psychokinesis disappeared without a trace. Right now, he was no different from an ordinary 4- or 5-year-old child. Without any psychokinesis, any ordinary person could beat him down. It seemed that the punishment of the heavenly Tao was really abnormal. Fortunately, this punishment only lasted for 3 days. After 3 days, he would recover and then deal with the second pair. After he realized that he had lost all his psychokinesis, he didn't want Ning Shuama to find out. He also didn't want her to take care of him like a child, so he chose to share the ride with her. He had left a barrier on Tianshu Mountain. After arriving at Tianshu Mountain, he would bring Ning Shuama into the barrier to recuperate. It wouldn't be too late to come out after 3 days. His plan was good, and there were no loopholes. However, plans could never keep up with changes. The unforeseen event seemed to have happened in an instant. Shinjuli was meditating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and suddenly opened his eyes. Clouds were floating in front of him, and the sky above was blue like a gem. He couldn't see anything unusual. However, Shinjuli sensed danger in this calm and tranquility. There was some unknown danger approaching him at a high speed. "Dodge to the left," he suddenly shouted. Kiran, on the other hand, was not aware of any danger. It was flying steadily. When it suddenly heard Shinjuli's order, it was stunned. It was at this moment that a pitch-black vortex suddenly appeared 3 to 4 meters ahead of them. The whirlpool was obviously not a good thing. The little Qilin was shocked and hurriedly dodged to the left. But it was too late. Its speed was too fast and the distance between them was too close. Although it tried its best to dodge to the left, it still could not stop its momentum and crashed into the whirlpool. The power of the whirlpool was astonishing. Kiran felt as if he had been sucked into a huge hole with a strong suction force. The wind was howling inside the hole, and he could no longer struggle out. He could only let out a scream before he was sucked into the whirlpool and disappeared. Ning Shuama and Hong Ti were flying ahead when they suddenly heard Kiran scream. Ning Shuama immediately turned around, and her expression changed. The whirlpool that had appeared out of nowhere behind them was like a tornado, making a terrifying sound. However, Kiran, who was flying behind them, was nowhere to be seen. Great God! Little Apple! Ning Shuama acted almost without thinking. Her figure rose up like a flowing cloud, flying towards the direction of the whirlpool while shouting loudly. There was no response. The surrounding blue sky and white clouds were the same. There was no trace of anyone. Chapter 24:53. Only the mouth of the whirlpool was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Needless to say, they had been sucked in. "Master, this is a space-time whirlpool. You can't go." Hong Ti also turned and flew over, wanting to stop Ning Shuama. Ning Shuama did not stop at all. She jumped into the whirlpool, leaving Hong Ti with only one sentence. "Hong Ti, you don't have to follow me." No matter what dangers lay ahead, she would advance and retreat together with Shinjuli. There was no reason for her to abandon him. As for Hong Ti, after all, the dangers ahead were unknown. She did not want Hong Ti to take the risk with her. Hong Ti was stunned. Seeing that the whirlpool was about to swallow Ning Shuama, it shouted, "Master, wait for Hong Ti." It closed its eyes and jumped into the whirlpool as well. The whirlpool in the sky disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Just as the two people and the two beasts were swallowed by the whirlpool also suddenly disappeared in the sky, as if it had never appeared. Ning Xuema did not know how many space-time transmigrations she had experienced in her life and how many whirlpools she had jumped into. Only this time was the most ecstatic and soul-stirring experience. The whirlpool was inky black, and there was no light at all. The whirlwind around her was at least level 13, and it could tear a person apart alive. What was worse was that after jumping into the whirlpool, her psychokinesis seemed to be sealed by an inexplicable force. She could not even set up a protective enchantment. She could only spin crazily in the whirlpool along with the whirlwind. While she was spinning, she tried her best to open her eyes and call out the names of Shin Julie and Little Apple. However, she did not get any response. Not only was the whirlpool pure black, it could also swallow all sound. She had called out very loudly, but when she called out, it sounded like a weak cat meowing. Compared to the crazy howling wind around her, it was simply negligible. In the end, she simply stopped calling out, closed her eyes, and opened all the sensory organs in her body, trying to find out the whereabouts of Shin Julie. But he still couldn't sense it. Her fingers clenched tighter and tighter. She was now a devil master, and her skills were astonishing. Once she activated her sensing technique, she could sense the movements within a radius of 10 miles. Even if a fly flew past 10 miles away, she would be able to sense it accurately. But now, she could sense Hong Ti and Little Apple, but she couldn't sense Shin Julie. She was getting more and more flustered as she desperately told herself to calm down. Shin Julie was a god. Even if he had returned to his youth, he still had a lot of skills left. With his ability, even if he fell into the spacetime vortex, he would be fine. He must have the ability to protect himself. In this whirlpool, no one could make their own decisions. They could only rotate along with the whirlpool. Ning Xuema had the misconception that she was being dragged into the depths of hell by a hurricane. However, at this time, she could only go with the flow. The only thing she could do was to adjust her body from time to time, desperately trying to get closer and closer to the little Qilin. Pooh! In the high-speed rotation, Ning Xuema seemed to have broken through a spacetime door. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and a white light rushed toward her. In the next moment, her body seemed to have rushed out from the ground and directly shot up into the sky. Fortunately, although she had lost her psychokinesis, she still had her inner strength. She turned in the air and floated down to the ground. Zhang Xian glanced around and was taken aback. This place seemed to be a glacier. She was surrounded by high and low ice peaks in all directions. She was surrounded by white snow, and all she could see was a silvery white. Where did the great god go? It's the first of the month. Most of you have guaranteed monthly votes. Vote, vote. Use your monthly votes to summon the great god. Chapter 2454. What was this place? What world was this? Ning Xuema didn't have time to think about these. Her eyes anxiously looked around, looking for Shin Julie's figure. She couldn't see anyone around her, and she couldn't hear anyone's voice. She didn't give up. She jumped up, found the highest peak, and then bent down to look around. She should be in a glacier valley. There were countless ice towers and ice mushrooms. She stood at the highest point so she could see everything around her. She didn't find Shin Julie's figure, but she saw Hong Ti. That little phoenix just came out of the ice nest and looked around in confusion. Finally, it saw Ning Xuema's figure in the distance. It immediately spread its wings and flew over. Master! Ning Xuema and Hong Ti met up. Hong Ti came out later than Ning Xuema, so it didn't see Little Apple and Shin Julie's figure. Unfortunately, Hong Ti had no sense of direction, and its sense of smell wasn't very sensitive. Ning Xuema's idea of relying on it to find people fell through. Ning Xuema lost her telekinesis and couldn't fly. Fortunately, although Hong Ti was dizzy from the whirlpool, it wasn't really injured, so it didn't lose its flying ability. It carried Ning Xuema and flew up, looking for people within a radius of 100 miles. Since they came through a whirlpool, the place where they landed shouldn't be too far away. Ning Xuema estimated that it shouldn't be more than 100 miles away. But after she rode on the Little Phoenix and searched for half an hour, she still couldn't find Little Apple and Shinjuli's whereabouts. Could it be that the whirlpool could bring people to different places in different eras? Ning Xuema knew that a lot of time and space whirlpools had this problem. Thinking of this, she panicked a little. If she and the great god were in different eras, then how could she meet him? She secretly took a breath and made up her mind. First, she would search around here. If she really couldn't find anything, she would find a way to travel back to Tianci continent. Presumably, if Shinjuli could not find her, he would also travel back to that place. Only then would the two of them have a chance to meet. Fortunately, she and Shinjuli were a demon and a god respectively, so their skills were not low. No matter which era they traveled to, they still had the ability to protect themselves, so there would not be any accidents. She comforted herself in her heart as she searched in this world of ice and snow. Master, there's an ice cave below us. Could they be hiding there? Little Red Tea cried out. Let's go down and take a look. Ning Xuema's eyes also lit up. She had searched the ground within a radius of 100 miles, but she couldn't find the shadow of the man and the beast. Now that she saw an ice cave, she naturally wouldn't let it go. It was an uncanny workmanship. It would not be an exaggeration to call this ice cave the work of the gods. The cave was extremely deep. An icy blue light flickered inside, just like the legendary Crystal Palace. Ning Xuema stood at the entrance of the cave and looked at it for a moment. This cave was not formed naturally, but was dug out by humans. And looking at the traces, it was carved out by a treasured sword or some other sharp weapon, and not by a special ice chiseling tool. She was a little puzzled. The ice of the glacier had been cold since ancient times and was as hard as diamond. Even if a special ice chiseling tool was used, it might not be able to carve out the desired shape. Who used a treasured sword to carve out such an ice cave? She touched the wall of the cave with her fingers and confirmed that this ice cave was carved out by the same treasured sword. In other words, it was done by one person. Ning Xuema looked into the cave. The cave was too deep, and she couldn't see the bottom. She also couldn't see what was in the cave. Chapter 24:55. If a person was stranded here and wanted to rest, he should have chiseled the ice to build an ice house, right? Instead of chiseling this ice cave, which obviously required a lot of energy, Ning Xuema was puzzled. Master, there seems to be something inside. Hong Ti sniffed hard and reported to her. Since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. Ning Xuema decided to go in and take a look. The ice cave was actually a huge hole with many small holes inside. It had many twists and turns, and there were forks in the road from time to time. What was even more surprising was that there was actually a mechanism inside. The mechanism was also very advanced, and it was often triggered by a slight movement. As long as there was a slight movement, there would be a series of hidden weapons shooting out. Fortunately, Ning Xuema was an expert in the art of mechanisms, and she could often detect the location of the mechanism with just one glance. She took Hong Ti and avoided it directly, which was a daunting experience. The more Ning Xuema walked in, the more surprised she became. It was definitely not the work of a single person to dig such an ice cave, and the layout of the cave looked like the structure of an Egyptian pyramid. It should have a strong anti-corrosive effect. What was hidden in this ice cave? Could it be a treasure cave of some robbers? She still could not sense the breath of Shinjuli and Kirin. She wanted to go back the way she came several times, but she was unwilling. What if he was here? She walked for a while and suddenly stopped. There was an ice room in front of her, and there was an ice bed in the ice room. There was an ice coffin on the ice bed, and there was a person in the ice coffin. Ning Xuema cursed in a low voice. Bad luck. It turned out that this ice cave was not a treasure cave, but a special tomb. She had accidentally broken into someone's tomb. Master, she is so beautiful. Right now, Ning Xuema was not the slightest bit interested in things like coffins and tombs. Originally, she wanted to turn around and leave, But Hong Ti had a curious temperament and had already flown above the ice coffin to check it out. After looking for a moment, she let out a cry of surprise and praise. "Master, come and take a look. She seems to be alive." Alive? Ning Shuima's heart skipped a beat, and she looked into the ice coffin. Her eyesight was very good. Although the ice cave was a little dark, she could still see everything in the cave. She finally saw the appearance of the person in the ice coffin, and her heart trembled slightly. Inside the ice coffin was a young girl. She looked to be about 15 or 16 years old and was wearing a pink robe with peach blossoms. Her black hair covered her forehead and a half-moon-shaped pink jade hairpin was inserted into her sideburns. Her long eyelashes were curled up and covered half of her face. Her skin was like jade and her cheeks were white with a touch of pink. Her full red lips were pink and pouty. Her entire person was so delicate that it seemed like water could be squeezed out with a pinch. This young girl was extremely beautiful, and it was the kind of pure and tender beauty that made people want to take pity on her and protect her in the palm of their hand. Devastatingly beautiful. These 4 words were truly worthy of being used on her. Looking at her dress and appearance, this young girl was like the kind of girl that was cherished in the palm of one's hand. She did not know the ways of the world, but she was an innocent girl. She did not know why she had withered here and was placed in this ice coffin. Ning Shuima looked at the young girl in the coffin for a moment, and her heart suddenly skipped a beat. The young girl's lips were slightly raised, as if there was a trace of a cold smile, with a touch of mockery and a touch of relief. She was frozen there. She gave people a kind of resolute beauty, and it was quite soul-stirring. "Master, she is still alive, right?" Hong Ti wandered around the ice coffin. The ice coffin was very thick, and it could not touch the young girl in the coffin at all. It could only see that the young girl's face was alive, as if she would open the coffin lid and sit up in the next moment. Chapter 2456. "No, she's dead," Ning Shuima said with certainty. Although she had lost her telekinesis, she was still a medical expert. She could see the girl's state at a glance. The girl was dead, and her soul had been scattered. Ning Shuima had a strange perception of souls. Normally, after a person died, there would be a few remnant souls remaining in the body. However, there was not a single remnant soul in this girl's body. What was left in the ice coffin was only a beautiful body. "Is she dead? What a pity. She's so beautiful." Hong Ti was talking endlessly. Ning Shuima pursed her lips and did not say anything. She pulled Hong Ti to prevent it from moving around. She did not want to accidentally activate any mechanism and open the ice coffin. She had opened the crystal coffin out of curiosity and released Shui Ilan. She had a lot of trouble for no reason. She had long been traumatized by this kind of thing, so she was not curious at all. Not to mention that there was only a beautiful girl in the ice coffin. Even if there was a peerless weapon inside, she would not be tempted. She quickly looked around the ice room to make sure there was no one else in the ice room. She then pulled Hong Ti and left. "Let's go." Hong Ti was still reluctant to leave. "Master, is this the legendary treasure coffin? I saw a beautiful dagger in the ice coffin. It was inlaid with a pigeon egg-sized ruby." Ning Shuima did not turn her head. For her, not to mention a pigeon egg-sized ruby, even an egg-sized diamond would not be able to move her heart. She just wanted to find Shinjuli and confirm his safety. Since Shinjuli was not here, she would go somewhere else to look for him. Although Hong Ti was reluctant, it could not disobey its master, so it followed her out. When they were about to reach the entrance of the cave, Ning Shuima suddenly sensed something. She pulled Hong Ti and flew into a narrow side cave to hide their bodies. Hong Ti was now in her human form. She knew when to advance and when to retreat. When she saw Ning Shuima's actions, she knew that someone was coming. She hid behind Ning Shuima and only revealed her eyes to look outside the cave. The sound of clothes fluttering in the wind came from outside the cave. A moment later, the cave entrance darkened and a person walked in. Hong Ti's eyes lit up. Handsome guy. According to Little Apple, he was a handsome guy who was extremely beautiful. That person looked to be in his 20s. He was tall and straight and wore a loose purple robe. He had a handsome face and deep facial features. His thin lips were slightly pursed. His entire person was like a silhouette of flowing light, making the surrounding snow lose its color. That person had a pair of extremely black eyes that were deep and dark. His entire person gave off a feeling of elegance and indifference. However, the corners of his lips faintly carried a trace of the evil aura of a silk pants, bringing along a bewitching and seductive feeling. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. She was very good at judging people. This person's temperament was extraordinary. There was a kind of elegance and nobility of a person who had been in a high position for a long time. He should be someone who held great power and was full of vigor. In this world, his status was definitely not low. But why would such a person appear here alone at this moment? There was also a kind of cold and lonely feeling on his body. It was as if he was shrouded in a kind of invisible despair and indifference. This person's martial arts were obviously very high. Even though he was walking normally, his landing was silent. He took large strides into the cave, but there was not the slightest movement. His movements were as smooth as flowing water. Ning Xuemo was a martial arts expert. Seeing this, she could not help but applaud this person's martial arts. Chapter 2457. In terms of Kung Fu, this person's Kung Fu should have reached the peak. He should be a master of his generation. This person looked so young, but his Kung Fu was so high. Obviously, he was a peerless genius. Coupled with his appearance, he should be doing well in this world, right? After Ning Xuemo came to this world, the psychokinesis in her body disappeared without a trace. This made her suspect that psychokinesis did not exist in this world. Now that she saw this person again, she was even more certain of this point. She could not help but think of Shinjuli. He was in the process of returning to his youth. Without the protection of psychokinesis, it would be difficult for him to survive in this world with the strength of a 4- or 5-year-old child. Where would he be? Was he in danger now? The more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. It was as if she was on fire. The ice valley Ning Xuemo landed in was very strange. She searched the area within 100 miles. There was only ice and snow. Not to mention people. She did not see anyone breathing. Now, this person was the only living person she met. She thought for a while and gestured to Hong Ti, indicating that she should wait in place. She quietly followed him. The person seemed to have a lot of things on his mind. Or maybe he was used to there being no one here. He was not on guard at all, so he did not notice Ning Xuemo following behind him. He walked around in the ice cave. Looking at the direction he was heading, it was the ice room where the ice coffin was hidden. The person's footsteps were originally hurried, but when he was about 10 steps away from the ice room, he suddenly stopped and looked up at the ice room. He stood there motionless. Ning Xuemo secretly calculated the distance between them. Her heart skipped a beat. From his position, he could see the ice coffin. The person stared at the ice coffin. His whole body seemed to be petrified, as if he had turned into a statue. Ning Xuemo was standing not far behind him, so she couldn't see his expression clearly. She could only faintly feel a touch of desolation and grief emanating from him. His back was tall and straight, yet it was deathly still. "Ah, you! I'm here to see you again." After a while, he finally spoke. The voice was hoarse and low, as if it was trying hard to suppress something. That was all he said. He didn't say anything else. He just stared, and stared without moving. Ning Xuemo was almost worried that this person would become a fossil. She also took a look inside the cave and guessed what was going on. The girl in the ice coffin should be this man's lover, right? This hole was made by this man. Was it specially used to store the corpses of lovers? She couldn't tell that this man was such an infatuated man. However, his little lover seemed to have been poisoned to death. With this man's status, he wondered if he had avenged her. Ning Xuemo had always had a good impression of infatuated men, so after pondering for a moment, she decided to disturb this man. Her figure flashed as she walked out from the shadows. "Brother, please." The man's body stiffened, and he suddenly turned around. At the same time, countless tiny silver lights shot towards Ning Xuema like a storm. Ning Xuema. How could such an elegant and handsome man kill people without saying a word? With her kung fu, she naturally wouldn't be hit by those hidden weapons. Her figure flashed, and her palm drew an arc in the air. A moment later, the silver light hidden weapons were all in her hands. They were a bunch of silver needles, and there were about 40 to 50 of them. If she had dodged a little slower, she would have become a silver hedgehog by now. She weakly asked for a monthly vote and a recommendation vote. Wah! Chapter 24:58. It was a handful of silver needles, about 40 to 50 of them. If she had dodged a little slower, she would have turned into a silver hedgehog by now. Ning Xuema weighed the silver needles in her hand. The silver needles danced in her palm like flashing lights. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Why do you want to kill me?" The man did not expect her to be able to catch his silver needles. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who are you? How did you get in?" Ning Xuema paused the silver needles in her palm. Judging from the man's tone, could this be a forbidden area? If this was a forbidden area, it was understandable that she could not see anyone else here. However, the forbidden area was usually restricted to humans. Here, she could not even see other breathing creatures. She raised her head and looked at the man. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat. That man seemed to be casually standing there, but the angle and posture he was standing at was the best. He could attack or defend if he wanted to. He even intentionally or unintentionally blocked the entrance of the ice room, blocking all of Ning Xuema's paths to sneak attack the ice coffin. She actually met someone of the same profession. This person must have been an assassin or something like that. He was always looking for the best angle to attack. Ning Xuema suddenly moved. The man only felt that his eyes were dazzled. The girl in front of him suddenly changed her angle and led him to turn half a circle involuntarily. Ning Xuema stood on a piece of ice stone. The man narrowed his eyes slightly. It turned out that Ning Xuema had turned the situation around just now. She was originally standing in a position that was not good for defense. However, she only took a few steps and turned into a blind spot. Now he was at a disadvantage again. This woman not only had amazing skills, but she was also an expert in sneak attacks. "Are you an assassin?" the man said coldly. He took a step back without batting an eyelid. This step was just right, allowing him to slightly turn the tables on himself. Ning Xuema's lips curved into a smile as her figure rushed forward. The man was also on guard. His body naturally rotated along with her, and the sword in his hand was unsheathed. Ning Xuema did not bring any weapons with her. At her level of cultivation, she could easily use her telekinesis to form any weapon. However, after transmigrating to this world, her telekinesis had disappeared, so she could not form any weapon. At this moment, she could only fight with her opponent empty-handed. Although she had been strengthening her psychokinesis all these years, she had not neglected the cultivation of her inner force. Moreover, she was originally a secret agent, so her grappling skills were not ordinary. After so many years of living on the line between life and death, she had trained her skills to be as slippery as a fox. Ning Xuema was better than Shinjuli when it came to adaptability and internal strength in a fight. If she claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. No matter which world she was in, she would be a top figure. She did not expect to meet her match here. Ning Xuema used her empty-handed blade blocking kung fu several times in an attempt to snatch his sword, but he dodged her every time. This person's movements were extremely fast and his psychokinesis was extremely high. When he surrounded Ning Xuema and fought, his movements were so fast that they were like a continuous stream of afterimages, causing people to be dazzled. What was even more frightening was that each of his sword strikes were extremely crafty and precise, all of them aimed to take people's lives. Ning Xuema did not know how many people she had fought with in her life, but this person was the most difficult to deal with. Needless to say, this person was also the kind of person who had experienced life and death situations for a long time. She did not know how many people's blood and lives had fed him such skills. Chapter 24:59. It was not rare to see people with high skills, but only an assassin could have such a ruthless and exquisite move. This person should be an outstanding person in power, but she did not expect that he used to be an assassin. Ning Xuema originally did not care much about this person, but now she felt a little sympathy for him. After that person and Ning Xuema fought for dozens of moves, his eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. It was obvious that he did not expect the woman in front of him to have such a high level of skill. This made him even more shocked, and a dark light flashed in his eyes. His moves were more ruthless, and it was obvious that he wanted to kill her. In the fierce battle, Ning Xuema's figure suddenly flew towards the ice room. The man's face changed, and he desperately tried to stop her. Originally, during the fight, his defense was watertight. However, with his desperate attempt to block her attack, an opening appeared below his ribs. Ning Xuema's body spun around, taking advantage of this opportunity to close in on him. Her two fingers were like swords, directly poking at his groin. Clang! The sword in the man's hand fell to the ground, and his whole body was fixed there, unable to move. Ning Xuema clapped her hands and looked at him. "Your skills are not bad. You used to be an assassin, right?" The man pursed his lips and did not answer, but looked at her with a faint, sharp gaze. "Who are you? Who sent you?" Ning Xuema sighed. "I'm just a passerby, brother. You don't have to be so nervous like a hedgehog. Now I'll ask you a few questions, and I hope you can answer me sincerely." The man's eyes flashed slightly, and he obviously did not believe Ning Xuema's words, but he was under her control now, so he did not point it out. He only said two words. "You can ask. What continent and what country is this? What year is it?" The man's eyes showed surprise, as if he did not expect her to control him just to ask these two idiotic questions. He did not understand what Ning Xuema was trying to do, so he pondered for a moment and answered truthfully, "Cloud Underworld Continent, Jiyu Country, the second year of Kaiyuan." A completely unfamiliar dynasty. Ning Xuema sighed inwardly. An inexplicable space-time vortex had brought her here. It was really inexplicable. How was she going to go back? I wonder if there is a space-time tunnel in the sky here. She continued to ask a few more questions and found out that this glacier was called Forgotten River. It was located 100 li away from the capital of Jiyu Country and had a radius of 500 li. Almost everyone in Jiyu Country knew about these questions, so the man had nothing to hide. Ning Xuema also knew that the questions she asked were idiotic in the eyes of her countrymen. She glanced at the man, thinking that he would look at her as if she was an idiot. However, she didn't expect that his eyes would remain as calm as water, making it impossible for others to guess what he was thinking. This person was truly a scheming person. Ning Xuema glanced at the man's face. "Who are you? Jiyu Country's prince?" This person had a kind of kingly aura, so his status should not be low. The man slightly choked and replied indifferently, "I am just a poor person." He did not directly answer Ning Xuema's question. Ning Xuema was actually too lazy to know the other person's identity. She had just asked him randomly. She also asked about the specific topography and characteristics of Forgotten River, so that it would be more convenient to find Shinjili. The man answered all of her questions. Ning Xuema nodded in satisfaction. Before she left, she glanced at the ice room and her gaze turned to the ice coffin. Chapter 24:60. Even if the man was restrained, he could still act as if nothing had happened. However, when Ning Xuema looked at the ice coffin, his body tensed up and a trace of nervousness flashed across his face. Although he was used to concealing his true feelings, his nervousness only lasted for a moment before disappearing. However, Ning Xuema, who was used to observing people's expressions, noticed it. She smiled and decided to give him a reminder as a reward for asking this question. "You seem to be very worried about her. Then, do you know that she was poisoned to death?" The man's eyes shrunk and he blurted out, How did you know? Ning Shuama did not answer and turned to leave. She had more important things to do and did not want to waste time here. Master! A tender voice was heard. Hong Ti could not help but run over. It showed its original form, which was a fiery red phoenix. Master, are you all right? Ning Shuama jumped onto the phoenix's back. I'm fine. Let's go. Hong Ti looked at the man who was restrained. Although it was puzzled, it still listened to Ning Shuama's words and flew out with Ning Shuama on its back. The cave was peaceful again. The man stood there and the surprise in his eyes could not be concealed. Phoenix. He actually saw a phoenix that had never existed in this world. Who was this girl who appeared out of nowhere? Her martial arts were extremely high and she knew nothing about this continent. She even had a phoenix as her mount. Was she a deity? His eyes flashed slightly and no one knew what he was thinking. The terrain of Wangchuan was very complicated. Ice peaks, ice towers, ice caves could be seen everywhere. There were even ice cracks. Looking for a person in such a complicated area was like looking for a needle in a haystack. In the process of searching, Ning Shuama finally met other people from this world. It was a group of guards in bright armor. These people were originally patrolling. When they suddenly saw a phoenix flying over their heads, it immediately caused a commotion. Many people cried out in surprise and rushed over, wanting to hunt this fire phoenix. Heavenly nets, flying arrows, flying stones. All kinds of weapons were used and attacked the fire phoenix like locusts. The psychokinesis on Hong Ti's body also disappeared without a trace. Couldn't even spit out fire. The hidden weapons that were flying towards it were not small in strength. It flapped its claws and wings and was having a hard time dealing with them. Ning Shuama's figure rose. Her movements were as fast as lightning. Her whole body was like a red cloud as she circled around Hong Ti. A moment later, the concealed weapons surrounding Hong Ti disappeared without a trace. Ning Shuama was standing on Hong Ti's back with an arrow in each of her hands. Her red dress was fluttering in the wind. She was like a fairy who had arrived on the wind. The group of guards was dumbfounded. They never thought that there would be someone on the back of the fire phoenix. Moreover, it was a woman with such high martial arts. She actually used her delicate hands to catch the hidden weapons that they shot out. It's impolite not to reciprocate. I'll return it to you. Ning Shuama flicked her finger, and the long arrow in her hand flew back as if it had eyes. The guards were all taken down. Of course, Ning Shuama didn't want their lives. The arrows that were shot back had already broken the arrowheads. The arrows that were shot on these people's bodies only sealed their acupuncture points. Of course, in order to teach them a lesson, Ning Shuama still shot them until they suffered internal injuries. It would take at least 10 days to half a month for them to recover. After taking down these people, Ning Shuama jumped down this time. She caught a person who looked like the leader and interrogated him for a while. Finally, she got some information. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.